colleagues, we are going to go out of order and look at item 10. Next item on our agenda is consideration of the 2019 school and district performance frameworks targets. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for moving this up and for the team for coming down. We've talked with you all about this item. We have, just for my team, we have about 20 minutes because we have a timed item at 2. So just hopefully you can plan that in advance. So I'll turn this over to Alan Dillon.
When do you want me to say what you want me to say? At the end?
Yeah. Because this is a voting item.
Oh, this is a voting item?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, oops, okay.
So Ashley Peachy and Marie Hutchton.
Hi.
All right, well, good afternoon. It's great to see everybody, and we'll try to make this quick and concise because we know this has been a lot of work here lately. So after our conversations of the last several months, we have gone, we did what the board directed us to do. We went back out, we got a lot of feedback from the field. Based on the feedback that we got from the field around the accountability frameworks and setting the targets, which is an item for the board to vote on today, we've come up with a plan and a recommendation. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, and we'll share with you what we have thought through. So.
Great. So starting with a little background, so our state accountability system, our accountability system is driven by state and federal statute. And so our state accountability frameworks are driven by SB 9163, which calls for one set of outcome data to determine overall district and school accountability, which is the performance frameworks in our state. And the purpose is to identify those schools and districts with the greatest need in order to direct resources and support and potential consequences. So over the past 2 board meetings, we've had some conversations around the frameworks in preparation for rulemaking in the spring. The 3 areas we focused on have been around setting achievement, growth, and post-secondary workforce readiness targets on the performance frameworks, the weighting of achievement, growth, and post-secondary and workforce readiness on the frameworks, and also the addition of the growth to standard measure, which is going to be included in that weighting conversation. The rulemaking process is scheduled to begin in spring 2019 for the bill HB 18-1355, which was passed this past spring. And so during the rulemaking process in the spring of 2019 is when we're going to be having conversations around all of these 3 areas. So our CDE recommendation is based on this timeline that is on the screen right now and based on feedback we've heard from the field. And so in November, today, we'll be voting, the board will be voting on the 2019 targets. So that's the targets for the frameworks that will be released in August 2019. And we would like to push the conversation around any adjustments to target setting that will come beyond 2019 to happen during the rulemaking process in conjunction with the conversations around performance indicator weighting and the addition of growth to standard. So we can talk about all those things together, run models, and have a full conversation about that. CDE staff right now is engaged in feedback sessions with various groups across the state. We're working really closely with our technical advisory panel to tackle some of these areas, and we're also talking to superintendents and district folks, advocacy groups, and stakeholder groups across the state to get input on these areas as well. Our target year of implementation, if we were to do any adjustments, for the board were to direct any adjustments, would be with the 2020 performance frameworks. And then we also want to point out that we can spend additional time in this conversation if needed. And so we can extend this conversation in the spring when talking about target setting and weighting and other performance indicator areas of interest to give ourselves enough time to have a full conversation about that. And so as we mentioned, right now, CDE staff is visiting established stakeholder group meetings and also reaching out to stakeholder groups that we're hearing from. Based on conversations we've had with the board, some materials and the process for submitting comments are all available online. Feedback can also be sent to CDE staff and actually directly to board members as well. And public feedback sessions will occur during the rulemaking process. There are a lot of opportunities for stakeholders to engage in this conversation, and we really are looking forward to to talking to everyone and having a full conversation about any adjustments on the frameworks moving forward. That being said, we'd like to focus today's presentation and today's vote on target setting for the 2019 frameworks. And just a reminder that within statute, it states that the state board shall set, reaffirm, or revise as appropriate, ambitious but attainable statewide targets for the measures used to determine the levels of attainment of the performance indicators, which are growth, achievement, and growth to standard, and PWR for the coming academic year. And so that's what the board will be voting on today. And just a quick reminder of what we're talking about. So performance indicators, again, are achievement, growth, PWR, and our current frameworks. Sub-indicators are the targets that we're going to be setting today for the 2019 frameworks. And so a sub-indicator of academic achievement on our elementary school performance frameworks is the CMAS English and Language Arts sub-indicator. And again, those targets to this point have been set using a normative methodology. So saying that the MEETS bar has been set at the 50th percentile based on historic data that we've seen across the state. So CDE does recommend keeping all of the sub-indicator targets for the 2019 school and district performance frameworks consistent with the 2018 targets and values. And again, speaking to our timeline, this will allow time per board request for CDE staff to create options for future target discussions encompassing framework targets, a growth to standard metric, and discussion of the growth weights. And board members, you should have received a handout that had the actual targets listed on them. I'm not sure. Okay, great. We wanted to leave some time for any questions or comments just on CDE's recommendation and the targets for the 2019 performance frameworks.
Thank you. And I know Board Member Durham had some questions, and since he needs to leave a little early, and I think I got confused on which presentation he had questions on, but I think these are all connected, so we may want to toggle Busy or Carol between the other PowerPoint. Sure. So that he can refer to the slides, but I think it's all related to the targets. Mm-hmm.
Great. So in the slide deck we're breezing through now is the district accreditation rating results. I believe this is a good slide to stop on.
Yeah, this is. I think at some point I just wanted to be. We've been inundated. I know staff has been inundated with stakeholder feedback about making any changes. Certainly in the year we're in, and I think we've agreed. At least I think most of us have agreed that we would not make any changes in 2019, and then try to come up with a rational set of changes going forward, perhaps some phase-ins. But the problem that I think we need to solve is the disconnect between, that's shown on this slide, and for districts you have 5 categories. So if you were to presume we were dealing with A through F, you have essentially 95% of all the districts with C or better. And it could be that 95% of all of our districts are performing at C or better, but you can't say that 95% of our students are performing at C or better. And in fact, about 60% fail to meet expectations. So you have essentially a 60% failure to meet expectations and a 5% district poor performance. And so you have to, I think we need to try and take a look at getting to this alignment down the road, and at least, and I think there's been some feeling that on the part of the interested communities that we want to do something to make them look bad, or they will look bad, or somehow a negative, and it may turn out ultimately be negative in terms of you know, not everybody's going to have quite as high a performance as they have now. But I also don't think we can afford to leave, as this slide shows, where you simply have 3% of the districts, or 4% of the districts in that category. And so notwithstanding the fact that I know that the interested parties don't want us to try and align these, I believe it's in the best interest of students to try and align them at some point. And then you also see it on this chart here where essentially, I mean, and I think, and I'd like to, I think the commissioner did comment in her remarks earlier that we are doing a pretty good job helping the lowest performing districts, that they are moving off the clock. Now, they're not moving off the clock. In most cases, the students are not performing at an excellent level, but they're performing better or well enough to get off the clock. And so essentially, we could very well end up in a situation a few years from now, if we continue to make progress, where we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of our students failing to meet expectations, and yet we have no work to do to improve districts because they all are off the clock, which is a very likely possibility. And that doesn't mean, the fact they're off the clock doesn't mean we still don't have a lot of students who are not performing at levels I think that most of the members or all of the members of this board would like to see them perform. And so I do want to support the motion, I think, that's coming to set the 2019 standards as have been recommended by staff. But I think that leaves us a significant amount of work in March and April to try and find some way to address the disconnect between student performance and school and district performance. So that's what I wanted to just get on the record before I had to leave, because I think it really is. I don't think this chart, if you look at this, really presents an accurate portrayal of how Colorado students are doing. But if you looked at this, you would have to say, wow, things are getting pretty good. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Are you open to some comments?
Yes.
My understanding of the intent of the Accountability Act was to identify those districts that were in need of support from us. And to that extent, I don't know that there is a lot of criticism whether that accountability system is failing to do that. It is identifying districts that need our support. But what also has happened is that that particular tool is being used in another way, which is to grade all schools, even the ones who do not have large numbers of failing students. And it's not clear to me, but I know that it happens that a measure, when it's used a bunch of different ways, might be really good for one thing and really bad for the other. So I hope we're open to thinking a little bit more broadly about whether the 163 dynamics accomplish what you and I really want, which is to give a clear reflection to our public about all our schools. And that may not be the formula under 163. Just because they gave me a high-level degree does not mean that I can figure out the technicalities of that sucker at all, right? I can't say you've got this part wrong and you've got that part right, et cetera, et cetera. I'm totally conflicted about the part that we use, that under growth, by definition, half of our schools have negative growth, right? They're on the negative. I mean, there's so many pieces to this thing that give me this discomfort, but I don't have the skill to suggest how to rectify that. I think it's a pretty complicated thing, and we need to be clear about what does this measure effectively and what doesn't it. And if it doesn't measure what we want to have measured, maybe we ought to be looking for something else, which is what other states have tried, to my understanding, unsuccessfully so far. to do better.
Yeah, and I guess I haven't looked recently at the kind of reports that parents can pull, schools can pull, but it strikes me that, I'm certainly wanting to avoid oversimplification, but if you look on a micro level at your family, for example, and look at different variables, you could be getting a great score on the children in the family are getting a great education. You could get a great score on culture of collaboration. You could get a different score on the family moved too often or whatever,
Dinner's
So-
not very good.
Right, here we are looking at multiple variables and trying to use them for various purposes. And so it'd be nice if parents could perhaps create a report. Okay, if I just care about achievement, here's what it is. If I only care about growth, here's what it is. If I only care about safety, culture, teacher turnover, whatever. There's like multiple variables feeding into the big picture bucket. And so parents and the public and other entities and stakeholders have different levels of interest for different reasons. And so I think that Board Member Durham makes a good point, that we want to be clear when we say a district or school falls in a certain bucket, but the reason it's there is a level deeper that probably a lot of people would care about.
Right. And I think that's part of the program that the group of small districts was working on, to come up with a better measure of what's going on in their school district without negating what we've been doing with 163. The other thing that I just need to bring forward is that Board Member Rankin and I heard from Northwest BOCES folks. And one of the requests that was made by those soups was that whatever we come up with, that we find a way to restate data from at least 2 to 3 years in the past in order to show what would it have looked like if this new model, whatever we come up with, had been implemented. Now, I don't know if that's even possible, because if calculating growth to standard wasn't possible for the last couple of years, then we can't actually do that. And I don't know how we fudge that, but I just would like you to keep that in your mind, that it's not that there was necessarily very strong objection to making a change, to making a change to the targets, whatever it was. What was important, what I heard, what was important to them was that they be able to communicate with their community where they were last year, where they were 2 years ago, where they were last year, and where they are now, using a common measure. So there isn't suddenly a new score, and it's kind of like when they changed the SAT and the ACT, and you don't get a good sense. Ms. Goff?
Didn't we do that maybe within 2 years, 3 years ago?
So-
Last time we talked about
Stay on. Sorry. I believe we did this. We took a look at that, but I think it might have been in reverse when we changed from, we had to recalibrate with the new assessments. And there was a.
When we took out standard to growth?
we
I mean, growth to
took
standard?
Yes, we removed the AYP part of that. I don't know. But we've done that before, but I would appreciate too that maybe that, because
it
that
was
is the
done
past
before.
and we've gone back the other way now, that may not be readily available, but that would be a really valuable
But the thing is-
tool for us to use with communities.
We can definitely show impact data, and we did
Yeah.
a little bit of that actually last meeting when we said if we were to switch targets to be something different, this is how it would play out with the ratings. We can do that with all these different inputs that we're talking about. So we'll definitely plan to do that in the spring.
We did talk a little bit about it last month, and people can figure those things out. So I had some comments made in the month since from superintendents and teacher types, my friends, who said, wow, this is going to be interesting. The only follow-up I have to that now is there is concern and awareness of the capacity of CDE. Depending on the numbers of schools that will be possibly down in the support
Well,
category.
and another part of this conversation too is around the growth to standard measure that's going to be that we'll be working on, and that's gonna have an impact too. So there's a lot of different modeling that's going to need to be done. I mean, we absolutely hear you loud and clear on there's a lot of work to be done. We've started those conversations with, you know, with the technical advisory panel and some other groups that help us with that. And so certainly there is a lot of work that needs to be done around that.
Thank you very much. I think we're gonna table this now until later this afternoon. We wanted to give Board Member Durham a chance to bring up his concerns because he has to leave early, but we can continue our discussion later this afternoon, if that's okay with you all. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Sure. Because we have a hearing coming up right now.
We're skipping around, aren't we?
Yeah, we're skipping around.
What's that here?
Kinda have a mess here.
Oh. I thought it was sold.
So do we have to open the door for them, or what's the?
Can we just keep them outside?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Dear, what a mess.
Do we have name tags?
Yeah.
I'm making this motion. Oh, okay, because it's my district. Good. That's assuming I still want to make a motion. Where the heck is it?
I was just gonna move Melissa's stuff.
Take charge. I'm on it. That's not right.
Think about it. We wouldn't make this. Yeah.
I'm past laughing. I'm totally past laughing. But I'm glad you're laughing. Well, Colorado Board of Education will now conduct a hearing in case number 18-CS-03, the appeal of Boulder Valley School District Board of Education to deny Ascent Classical Academy Flatirons charter school application. During this hearing, the board will be acting in its capacity to hear appeals of charter schools and will hold the appellate hearing under the relevant charter school appeal law 22-30.5-108. I'd like to ask the person chosen to represent each party to enter their name in the record along with the party they represent. Please also introduce the persons you have designated to answer questions of board members. Only the individuals identified by the parties have the opportunity to address the board. Mr. Farmer.
Madam Chair, my name is Tim Farmer. I'm here to represent Ascent Classical Academy Flatirons. With me is Derek Schuler, co-founder and executive director of Ascent Classical Academies. Next to him is Heidi Ganal, also a co-founder and prospective parent for Ascent Classical Academy Flatirons. And next to her is Dr. Terrence Moore, who's the current principal of Ascent Classical Academy, Douglas County.
Thank you. Mr. Hood.
Madam Chairman, Elliot Hood, Kaplan and Ernest. I represent Boulder Valley School District. To my right is Tina Marquis, the president of the Boulder Valley School Board, and to her right is Rob Anderson, the superintendent, and to his right is Leslie Stafford, the chief operating officer of the district.
Thank you. The role of the State Board is to consider only those issues raised in the notice of appeal. The board has been provided with a record of on appeal. References to documents or testimony not present in the record on appeal will not be considered by the board. In relation to those issues contained in the notice of appeal, the board will apply the following standard of review following oral argument. The board will decide whether it is in the best interest of the pupils, the school district, or the community to support the local board decision to deny Ascent Classical Academy Flatirons charter school application. The parties have already submitted written arguments and information. A maximum of 30 minutes will be granted for oral argument and examination on each party's issues. You may reserve a portion of the 30 minutes for your rebuttal. During this time, the party may summarize its written arguments and information, and board members may ask questions. The hearing shall proceed as follows. Ascent Classical Academy Flatirons, the appellant, shall present its arguments, including questions from the State Board. Boulder Valley School District, the appellee, shall present its arguments, including questions from the State Board. The appellant, Ascent Classical Academy Flatirons, shall present its rebuttal. State Board may ask questions. And the appellee, BVSD, shall present its rebuttal. State Board may ask questions. Thereafter, the State Board will deliberate and render its decision. We will adhere to the maximum time limit, but each segment will be timed. You'll be notified by Ms. Cordial when you have 5 minutes remaining in your allotted time. Ascent Classical Academy, you may reserve some of your 30 minutes for rebuttal. Do you wish to do so?
Yes, ma'am, we'll reserve 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Boulder Valley, Mr. Hood?
10 minutes, please.
Okay. As is customary with any oral argument in an administrative hearing or judicial proceeding, we anticipate that board members may have questions and they may interrupt counsel with these questions. This is the only time during the hearing when State Board members may question the parties. Board questions and your responses are included within your 30 minutes time. Are there any questions? We'll now call on Ascent Classical Academy Flatirons for the allotted 20 minutes in their initial presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to start by recognizing that we know that y'all are busy and that this has been a long and difficult State Board session, and quite honestly, we wish we weren't here. If we could have avoided this, we would have done so, and we certainly don't wish there would have been another way rather than having to file this appeal and come before you here today. And if it didn't get adequately expressed in the briefs, we'll express it now that frankly we're sort of puzzled as to why we're here. Throughout the process and working with Boulder Valley, we felt like we were cooperative. We responded to all their requests for information. We provided a lengthy and thorough application that had already been approved, or at least a similar version approved in other districts. This was not, you know, a half-baked, sort of pulled out of a Cracker Jack box application. This was a high-quality application, and we've just been sort of scratching our heads all along as to how it was determined that the application was incomplete. We would prefer to be talking about substantive issues like whether or not we're going to adequately serve SPED students, or whether or not we could serve ELL students, or whether or not we're going to provide a high-quality education for students. We wish that that's what we were here to talk about, and wish we could have engaged Boulder Valley in some of those substantive type discussions. Unfortunately, because they refused to even review our application, we don't know what they like and didn't like about it, and there's not really much that we can engage with them in terms of how what they think about the proposed school. It's rather unfortunate. Essentially, what Boulder Valley has told us is that there's something missing from our application. And I think that's an important distinction to make. The case that they made is not that they disagree with policies that we submitted, or that they disagree with maybe curriculum choices or educational approaches. They've basically just said that we think that something is missing. And to quote from the resolution, what they said was missing is, quote, adequate reasons or replacement plans in support of requested waivers. Now, we made the argument in the briefs, and we'll make it here again. I mean, there's hundreds of pages of replacement policies. We used the exact template that the district provided to us in providing our rationale and requested waivers. And we're just sort of left to scratch our head as to why. Again, they didn't say that they didn't like what we submitted. They said it was missing, and we just never could quite square that. And ultimately, we worry about what this could mean for charter applicants, globally speaking, across the state.
Well, Mr. Farmer, let
Yes,
me
ma'am.
ask you a question, please. Because this is not exactly what you said in your brief. What you said was that at the time of the contract negotiations, these waivers that were not explained proper, or there was no rationale or replacement plan, should have been discussed at the time of contract rather at the time of application. You're now saying something different to me. Which do you mean?
Yes, ma'am. So it's a belt and suspenders approach. So we believe that we did submit adequate information, but if someone were to disagree with that, including the district, our backup argument or our suspenders were that, and this is the truth, practically speaking, this often gets hashed out in the negotiation of the contract, and this
But
is the
that's
reason.
not what's in the law, right?
The way we read the statute is that it requires replacement plans for state statutory waivers, but not for district policy waivers. And the reason why we think that is, we don't know what the district is going to allow us to waive. We have to engage in a back and forth interactive process.
And that's part of the application.
Well, no, that would be part of the negotiations. The application, as we've learned, there's not a whole lot of back and forth to it. We submit, the pile of paperwork, and then they go and review it, and then we get a decision at the end. The contract negotiations is where there's more of a back and forth of us submitting a list, and they're going to go through and say, no, you can't have this one, this one, and this one. Send it back. Well, no, we really need this one. It's more that interactive negotiating.
That's very often in an
process.
application, particularly when it's something that's expected in an application.
So
There's some question about how you've interpreted the law, but there's
Uh-huh.
probably not much question about the school district's policy, LGBTQ2, I can't remember what it was.
yeah.
Your whatever the letters are, that specify what they expect. They
Right.
told you what they wanted. They returned your application saying, please do this. And then what did your client do?
We actually used the exact template. Did you do it side by side? They actually look very, very similar in terms of what they sent us from Peak to Peak Charter School and said, use this as a template, and what we actually submitted. They're almost, identical.
Yeah, they
There
are
was some word
identical
choice.
because you didn't actually do it, you just copied it.
That's typically how it works. And that's actually what they were suggesting that we should do. Most charter schools are going to want the same district policy waivers regardless of charter school. You guys see state statutory waivers all the time. Don't most charter
Okay,
schools
those
ask to be the
policies,
same?
some of those policies were out of date, right? They have been changed since Peak to Peak. Peak to Peak was approved way back a long time ago. So you didn't want to go through and thoroughly come up with a rationale and a replacement plan for each of the policies. I mean, it's very unusual in my limited experience for all policies, all district policies, to be waived. That's kind of a stretch.
The district was free to say no. What they said was it's missing. They said the request was missing. Not that we don't like it or that we're not going to let you waive all of them. They said it was missing, and we're saying it was not missing.
What's missing is the rationale.
It was
and
objectively,
replacement.
it's objectively there. We highlighted it and pointed to it numerous times in the briefs. It's in the record on appeal. It's a grid of all the district policies on one side, and in the other column it says things like delegated to the school.
And there's some there and there's some not there.
Well, the ones not there are the ones we're not requesting. Right? I mean, there's a difference between saying we substantively don't want to give you certain waivers and they're not there. They were there, and this application deserved at a minimum to just be reviewed. The district could have denied it. They could have said, we don't like your curriculum approach. We don't like the waivers you requested, but they didn't. They said something's missing, and that's what's incorrect. But to your point earlier, we actually did go through, and some of those policies they cited, you can go on the website right now. If you pull out a smartphone, they actually are not accessible on Boulder Valley's website. We went last night and tried to pull some of them up. Apparently they're so new, they're not even publicly available. So we actually did go through and do the ones that were on the website. And again, if we didn't ask for one, if they said, well, we've changed it since then I guess we just weren't requesting it, and they don't have to give it to us. Again, it's a difference between a substantive argument versus something's missing. I mean, we worry that often charter applicants, volunteers, parents that want a better educational option invest hundreds of hours in putting these applications together. I mean, it's some excess of 900 pages that they put together, and they work hard on it. And then the district's not even going to look at it? I mean, to me, that's such a detrimental outcome, and it's not the message that we should be sending to these charter applicants that are volunteering their time.
Somebody looked at it and came back to you and asked for.
They didn't provide a substantive review. They provided a checklist review. And again, we disagree when they said that we didn't check a certain box, but they didn't provide a substantive review and tell us, we think this is a good approach, we think this is a bad approach. This is why we don't think a classical school in Boulder Valley School District is going to work. We would have loved that feedback, because now we're actually left in a position where if we wanted to reapply or we wanted to create a better application, we don't even know what they thought about it. To me, it really is such a bad decision by Boulder Valley, and we wish they would have just reviewed the application. We could have engaged in some great substantive back and forth dialogue had they but only done that, and particularly in a school district where we think that additional educational choice is important. And I know Ms. Ganal wanted to speak briefly to her own personal experience as a resident. Go ahead.
Could I just say one thing there? Sorry to interrupt here, but
It's your time.
The thing that classical education embraces more than anything else, which is the tradition of the West and of American self-government, is what we call the conversation. All of our classes are about the conversation, having conversations about the good and the beautiful and the true. And we understand that in the political realm, which charter schools are, you need to have that conversation. If we're not even invited to the table to have the conversation, then it looks very arbitrary in the way we don't even get a chance to talk. So that's what we're saying. We should have had a conversation, which is what a classical school is about, and we never even got to that point.
Hi everyone, I'm Heidi Ganal. I'm a CU regent, but I'm also a mom of 4. One 23-year-old who made it through and just graduated from University of Oregon. She went to Monarch High School and El Dorado K-8. And then I have 3 little ones that I have twins in the 1st grade, and then I have a 9-year-old in the 4th grade. And I joined the board for Golden View, 4 or 5 years ago, and fell in love with the model and fell in love with the school and just loved being in that school and seeing how much the children enjoyed learning Latin and the great classics and the founding principles of our country. And so I talked to Derek a couple years ago about opening one up near our neighborhood, and started talking to parents, and other parents started falling in love with the idea too. And we have over 350 children signed up that are interested in this school now. I live in Rock Creek in Superior. I'm really involved in the community. I love living up there, and I just really want this to be an option for our children. There's not another classical school up that way anywhere near, that we could even drive to or commute to. And those of us that really love this model and want the option for our children, that's all we're asking for, is the chance to have that. And I would just plead that we just have the conversation, as Dr. Moore says.
Thanks, Ms. Canal. And ultimately, really the way that we see this is a conversation about the expectations that we have for charter school authorizers and also the expectations we have for charter school applicants. And thankfully, when we talk about the expectations for charter school authorizers, we don't have to look very far, because the state board has actually adopted rules about how they expect charter school authorizers to act, and there's an entire sections about how they should treat incoming charter school applications. And there's words in there like transparency and collaboration and, you know, working together with applicants. And we frankly just didn't feel like that existed here. You know, I mean, how hard, if the district truly believed that there was 20 of them missing, or, you know, maybe we used a poor word choice when we said automatic waivers instead of delegated waiver, how hard would it have been to send us a quick email and we could have made a quick correction, right? And I mean, then the substantive application
Let me ask you
gets
just
to
one
move
more
forward.
question.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have the option when the board chose, I forgot the date of the meeting, at their
It was
meeting,
September.
to not review, to not vote on your application because they saw that it was incomplete or inadequate? Did you not have the option then to go back to them rather than pulling the trigger on an appeal to have that conversation, or were you forbidden?
I don't think that we were forbidden, but certainly that conversation's always open when we engage in the appeals process.
So why didn't you do that rather than appealing?
Uh-huh.
Why didn't you go back to them and say, okay, let's just sit down and talk and figure out exactly what it is that we need to do to have a complete application? Because remember, their
Sure.
process requires a DAC evaluation. Their process requires a number of staff folks who look at different parts of it, for finance, for curriculum, et cetera. In other words, they did not feel the application was ready. They said that to you. You did a little bit. They found that to be inadequate. And they took it off the agenda that day. Could you not have just gone back and said, okay, let's figure this out? Did you have to appeal and come here?
Derek, you want to speak to some of the history of the communications?
Yeah, Derek Schuler. I do think there's a little bit of background that's helpful here, especially talking about the facts of the case. When we started this process, which I think we initially reached out to Boulder Valley and put a letter of intent in over a year ago at this point, before we did the recent one, the Boulder guidance meets the statutory requirements, but it's fairly minimal. We actually went above and beyond what was requested, and we actually used the model state application that CDE has approved as a model application. So we use that. It's a lot more thorough. It's a lot more comprehensive. It also has a rubric and an evaluation criteria that we assessed our application against before we submitted it. So I guess the notion that it wasn't complete, it was somehow not very well considered, it just isn't true. This was actually a very thorough application. We initially looked at Boulder Valley School District and went through their requirements. We did a lot of research. We looked at a recent application they'd received from Summit Middle School, or for Summit Academy for their high school. So we actually looked at that application because it was very recent. They had actually already had received it, they had accepted it, they had reviewed it, approved it, and wrote a contract based off of it. Looking at that contract they'd recently taken action on, that school requested a number of district policies. Did they have replacements, rationales, intents? No, they just listed the policies. Somehow in that case, BVSD found that to be complete and worthy of a review. So when we came and said, we do expect we'll request a number. And on that note, with those number of policies, when that contract was written at BVSD, that turned into 281 district policy waivers. So somehow listing individual policy names without any of the replacements, the rationales, the intents, somehow got them to a contract with 281 policy waivers. So from my perspective, I think we were I don't think we were out of line to say we do expect to request a number. We'd like to negotiate that in the contract. And Boulder did come back and say we would actually would like to see a little more substance on that. They have over 400 policy waivers, or 400 policies. So when we got the feedback from BVSD, along with the template they recommended we follow, we did follow that template. We did not cut and paste the template. We actually went to the BVSD website, and as Mr. Farmer said, I looked again last night on the missing policies. We cut and pasted every policy they had. The policies referenced in the reply brief are not publicly available. They're nowhere to be found by a charter applicant team. So I'm curious why that's a salient point in this discussion when they're not even available.
You're not exactly answering my question. When they chose not to and took it off the consent agenda, did you not have the opportunity, instead of appealing immediately, to go back to them and renew a conversation? And did you try to do that and they refused?
So the message we got back from Boulder was at the 15-day mark. It said, your application is not complete. We're going to send it to the board here with a resolution to not find it. So that was, there was no conversation opportunity. We had met with Boulder several times.
Did you ask? I'm trying to figure out.
No, it's a good question. It was communicated to us as a final decision. As you know, in the appeals process,
But they didn't say refuse. The resolution doesn't say refuse. It's interpreted as being a refusal by law.
Right.
But they didn't say, we're not going to talk to you.
It was
We can't
communicated to us as a final decision, though, and as you know, in the appeals process, there is the opportunity.
In the resolution, is it a final? Does it say final?
That I don't know how any other way that you would take it. I mean, boards of education don't go to the trouble of writing a 2-page resolution to accomplish something that could be accomplished over an email if they were just requesting additional
We do a
information.
lot of resolutions. Go ahead, though.
Yeah, no, and it's usually to communicate a final decision. Again, and even during the appeals process, I engage with legal counsel on the other side. There's an opportunity to facilitation, and it's been communicated all along that this was a final decision. I mean, the question could be put right back to the district. I mean, why didn't they reach out to us, right? I mean, I think both sides were working on the assumption that we were at loggerheads, and this was the only outcome. I mean, why would they hire an attorney? You know, I mean, the channels of communication had come to a close at that point, and there'd been back and forth leading up to this decision by them, and it was just clear that we both disagreed, and we needed an arbitrator to decide it.
And I just quickly want to go through just the development, because that was a large part of the reply brief, is the nature of our response after they provided notification that we were incomplete. So again, we did go through, we did a thorough review of everything. The nomenclature may not be what Boulder Valley wanted, but I think the intent was delegatory waivers. And if you look at Peak to Peak, and again, the recent summit, those schools received every waiver, well, pretty much most of the waivers that we requested as well. So one of the substantive arguments that I noticed out of coming from BVSD was this idea, or the point that as a replication entity that has successfully started schools, they had high expectations. They would have loved to have seen actual replacement language. They made a big deal out of talking about we didn't know what your intent was. We didn't know how, we were unable to evaluate how you were going to fulfill the things that the board won't fulfill. So I have here, this is actually part of the record. This is over 115 pages of nothing but replacement policies. 115 pages. It's substantial. So the claim that we didn't take this seriously, we didn't provide them anything to evaluate, is just false. I think you can just look at this, and I think this is probably more an example of specific policy that any charter applicant has ever submitted to BVSD. So again, we're kind of at a loss on the claim that they were unable to evaluate our intent. We've actually provided policies. We actually followed their guidance that they provided us on the notice of incomplete. So we love the conversation. Again, it's unfortunate we're not here debating talking about the merits of our application, but just the technicality on why they refused to review it.
How are we on time?
30 seconds.
All right, I will close our opening statement by just saying we again, to reiterate this concern, I mean, if the message from the state board out to authorizers in terms of what we expect from authorizers is that You can deny an application without even giving any substantive review or any substantive feedback. If that's the message we send to authorizers on such thin rationale as that's been provided, I do have grave concerns, and so we respectfully request that you do remand this decision back to Boulder Valley for with instructions to approve this quality application and at a minimum to review it. Thank you.
Mr. Hood.
Good afternoon. I'm going to start out by answering your question, Madam Chairman. The answer is yes. We absolutely would
Repeat
have.
my question.
The question was, if they had gone to us and said, hey, we'd like to further discuss this, we would have said yes, we would have had that discussion. They didn't. There was also a suggestion just now that our policies aren't clear regarding charter school applications. Section 12 of our charter school policy is pretty darn clear. And it says, include a statement saying how the district charter school plans to comply with the intent of the statutes, rules, and policies that are waived. Can't be much clearer than that. In fact, that language mirrors language in the Charter Schools Act, which says you have to do that very thing.
Do you have all the policies posted on your website, or are some missing?
You know, that's a question I don't know the answer to. Can
Well,
I
who
defer
does?
to my staff?
Sure, your staff, you bet.
Not my staff, the BVSD staff.
Oh, okay.
As far as I know, all of our policies are available on our website. If there's one link that's not working, I'm not aware of that, but all of our policies should be available on our website.
I mean, that should be an easy yes or no.
Yes,
Have
they
you
are.
looked at them lately?
Yes, I have today.
How long, you saw them today and they're on the
Yes.
website. So we do have a little, is it hard to find?
No.
So your contention is that all of the policies in question are on the website.
Yes.
And how many are there?
435, I think.
Sounds a little bureaucratized, doesn't it?
They're CASB model. A lot of them are CASB model
That's correct.
policies.
Yeah.
And then the district,
I don't
wrote
think
their
I
own.
would hold CASB up as an example of lack
Well,
of
that's another issue.
bureaucratization, but,
we're using up their time, but yes, I agree.
yes. So now, getting to the board resolution, it's my understanding that the board resolution states that the application is incomplete because it does not contain adequate reasons. So in order to conclude that the reasons were inadequate, somebody must have reviewed it.
Correct.
And so having done that review, then wouldn't it have been just as simple to actually act on the application and reject it on its merits, as opposed to using this subterfuge here to find a way to delay or eliminate this particular charter school application?
Well,
I mean, there was enough review to find they were inadequate, so there should have been enough review. That should have been an adequate review to reject the application.
we disagree with that.
I'm using your words, not mine. Did not contain adequate. Adequate is your word. If it said did not contain reasons, you might be able to reach the conclusion you'd like to reach. But that's not my word, that's your word.
So I believe that what the resolution is saying by adequate is adequate rationale for explaining
It says
the
reasons.
intent of how they're going to accomplish the policies that they're waiving. That was what we were taking aim at, not about the substance of the application itself. That's something we didn't review. They didn't finish their application. The law and the policy is super clear on this. If you want to waive school policies, you have to identify the policies that you want to waive, and you have to provide an explanation of how you're going to meet the intent of that. They didn't do that. By law, it was incomplete. The resolution just embodies that.
Well, I don't know how you fail to review something and yet find it inadequate. You've got to review it in order to find it inadequate. If it's inadequate, it's rejectable. You don't need to do this interim thing. You could just reject it. And in that process of rejection, then you might end up with the kind of conversation that we were talking about here.
Their explanations in their spreadsheet were inadequate. The application about the school, the curriculum, the budget, the staffing, the model was not something that we yet deemed adequate or inadequate. We hadn't reviewed it yet. That is referring to their rationales that they put forward on their spreadsheet, attempting to follow state law and our policy. That's what that refers to.
Well, you know, it's a pretty fine hair you're splitting, and the result of splitting that pretty fine hair is of no benefit to anyone except the attorneys, as far as I can tell. Because there's a lot of taxpayer money expended here on one side, and it seems to me that if in good faith you were going to consider this application on its merits, there would have been an easy way to get there. Did the board just follow the attorney's recommendation, or did you make some decisions, you had some discussions that thought maybe you ought to proceed in a more collegial fashion?
Hi, I'm Tita Marquis. I'm the president of the board of the Boulder Valley School District, and thanks for having us here. It's also nice to meet everyone and finally meet the people who put in the application. It was a pleasure meeting all of you out in the lobby. So when we had, our schedule was to review, and as you know, it's a very long process to review because we go through the District Accountability Committee. We need to schedule it on their agenda. It took them about 3 or 4 months to go through the Summit High School expansion application, which, by the way, is a little different than a new application. They didn't have a new policy opening on that one because it was an expansion, so it was different than a brand new application coming to the district. I just want to make that point of clarification as well. The other piece is on, so to say that it was just as easy to have gone through the checklist to discover whether it was adequately explained, whether the intention was going to be met in the spreadsheet that was delivered to BVSD. There's a lot of work that goes into the second part of the application, and our view was that the District Accountability Committee and staff wouldn't be able to come up with a solid decision on the merits of the application without understanding the rationale behind the policy waivers that they were requesting. And because there was no direction given on how the policies would be, how that intent of our policies would be met, we didn't feel that it was the right time to hand it to the District Accountability Committee. Does that help?
No, because,
Okay.
very simply put, if the conclusion was that you couldn't adequately assess, then that's a good enough reason to reject the application.
Oh, so you're thinking we shouldn't have, but see, we didn't want to waste our district accountability's time, and we have to pay money to a consultant and waste taxpayers' money to
Even
go
more
through
of
that
it, huh?
whole process, exactly. So what I'm wondering is
So
why would we do a quick
what's the-
rejection without a thorough process?
What's the cheapest way and what's the best way to get back? So now, if the district decision is upheld, everybody here has to start over. Does that save anybody any money?
I'm not going to answer that. I'd have to think about that and talk to staff about that.
Is there some, well, let me ask your attorney, is there some way to not have to go back to square one here?
I'm not aware, sitting here today, whether there is at this point. I do know that they could certainly submit a complete application by the next deadline and provide adequate explanations for how they're going to meet the waivers, and we would certainly review.
What is
the
your
application.
deadline schedule?
August?
August 1st.
August 1st.
And that would be for a school opening in when?
2020.
So you've lost a whole year.
They lost a whole year.
Sounds like the students who might have benefited from this program have lost a whole year.
They lost a whole year at the hands of the applicants who didn't finish their application.
It's, so is it your contention that if they get an application submitted, that'll be considered on its merits?
If they submit.
Let me ask
Oh,
Ms.
I'm sorry, I wasn't
Marquez
sure if
there.
you were referring to me or not.
Could you repeat the question?
If they get an application to you, is it your contention that it'll be considered on its merits?
Of course.
So, and how many applications for charter schools have you had in the last 5 years?
1.
And I thought you just granted one, or was that an expansion?
Well, that was it. So I don't.
So you've had one expansion. When was the last time that you granted a charter? I mean, you have, as I understand it, 5 charter schools. How long has it been since you have granted a charter?
I have been on the board for 5 years, and we have not had a new school application in that time.
Anybody on staff have an answer to that question?
We haven't had an application in over 8 years. I think the last one we approved is Peak to Peak Charter School.
Is what?
Peak to Peak Charter School?
And do you have any
It's a
idea how long ago that was?
A long time ago.
A long time ago, yeah.
So you're, I mean, you hold up the, I think the way this is written is that you would like us to believe the fact that you have 5 charter schools, that you're a charter-friendly district. But I presume there's no one on the board that's ever granted or voted in favor of a charter school.
Yes, but our decision for the Summit High School, which is interesting because it's a separate educational philosophy than the middle school. It's not a straight expansion. It was a unanimous in support, I believe.
How many of the students in your district are in charters,
In charters?
in charter schools?
I believe it's 7% or
So
10%, somewhere around there.
7, 10?
Around 10%, that's correct.
Yep.
So the statewide average is about 13?
I don't know.
It is. Yeah.
So how many students do you?
Thank you.
All over? 31,000.
31,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that means that 300, well, 3,100 or something or.
Nobody can hear you. You need your microphone.
Can't hear anybody. No, I'm
No.
sorry. How many charter schools do you have?
5.
5, okay. And how long have they been in existence? Does anybody have that history?
Since 1995.
So were they all, did they all come in at the same time?
No, over time, we've approved them over time.
Okay. And, Madam President, would you say that they have been doing well,
Yes.
exemplary?
Well, I think they each fit a different need and have very unique profiles. So I think it would depend on how you measure the school.
So what kind of, what are the students? I mean, when you say they're different and they meet different students' abilities or what, could you tell us about maybe 2 or 3 of them and how they're meeting the needs of the district?
Sure.
Is that
We certainly can. But I'm going to defer to Ms. Stafford on that question.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
Or the superintendent.
Yeah, I can do it too.
Sure. I'm sorry.
First of all, good afternoon. It's so nice to see you all. Thank you all for all that you do for our schools and schools across Colorado. And so I've been superintendent for 3 months, and I've had an opportunity to visit personally all of our, not only all of our public schools, but all of our charter schools as well. And I've been very pleased about the opportunities that we have for students in choice.
Did you
in
come
our
from
district.
other Colorado districts?
No, I came from Fulton County Schools in Atlanta, Georgia.
They have charters in Georgia?
We were actually a charter school district.
So they have actually charter districts.
Charter districts, think about how we have schools of innovation. In Georgia, you actually have entire districts that have those types of flexibilities. And we also had 10 charter schools, had a KIPP charter school and some homegrown charter schools as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, in any event, have spent time at Peak to Peak, which is a K-12 experience for students, has a long waiting list, has really high-performing results for students. Horizons K-8, which is focuses on smaller opportunities, some experiential learning. We also have Justice High School, which is more kind of an alternative opportunity. Boulder Prep, which is also an alternative, and then Summit Middle School, which is also a charter that the board we were in negotiations to allow them to expand to create a high school. So we do have high-quality charter schools, have great relationships. I've actually met personally with all of our charter principals and look to continue the collaboration that we have to make sure that all students in our district have plenty of choice, all parents have plenty of choice in regards to their academic opportunities.
But do you have a school such as classical that is based, I think, on the Boston classical model, which is, you know, one of the first public schools in the country. I'd hate to think about the century, but that was a few centuries ago. And so it is very different, and it is asking for students who want to have a different kind of education than the schools that you just described.
Sure.
So, and that's not to say that you don't have schools in the district that already meet that, but it is a different kind of charter school that would meet, you know, the needs of students that are already asking for that type of education.
So the short answer to your question is no, we do not have a classical academy type charter school in our district. I will tell you that I've had this unique opportunity over the past 3 months as I've entered into this position to do lots of engagement. I've held over 60 meetings throughout our community. I've engaged thousands of people and have opened up lots of open Q&A in regards to, you know, ask anything that you'd like as we get to know one another. And I have not heard in any of those meetings one person speak to the need for a classical academy or for Ascent. And so I just didn't hear that throughout all of my engagement. So to answer your question, no, we don't have that today, but in my engagement over the past 3 months, I have not heard a community desire that we would that's something that people are looking for.
Thank you.
Well, it seems that there are hundreds of these policies. This application has attempted to address them. You're saying they're not all addressed. Are you willing to work with this group, since they have hundreds of parents on their list saying that they do desire this kind of an education? It's a different model. Would be strikes me as meeting the needs of all the individuals in your district, have lots of options. Are you willing to work with this group to help them get this application complete so that more individuals in your district could have this kind of an option? I mean, 400 plus policies, I mean, the over 100 pages that have already been submitted, it strikes me that it's something that really could be worked out without just walking away from it and having to come back in August and waiting a whole year.
I would say that we were engaged in that process with them. We did say, there are some gaps in your application, and you need to fill those gaps, and they didn't. And at this point, we're certainly willing to discuss with them, negotiate in advance of next year. But at this point, we're not going to go back to the drawing board and excuse this applicant for not following our rules or the State Charter Act at this point. They knew the rules. They knew what they needed to do. They're a sophisticated group of people who have opened up other charter schools in other districts. They know what the rules are. This is not a brand new charter school, as it would be, or as you would typically think of. You know, this is a group of people who've never formed a charter before. They know the charter rules. They've done this before. So at this point, no. But we're happy to look at their application again next year, should they submit a completed application.
Board Member Rankin?
I have 2 points I'd like to make. The first one is the conclusion that state law does not require charter applications to include rationales and replacement plans for district policy waivers. That's my interpretation of the law. That's what I believe. Second thing I'd like to mention, thank you, Dr. Flores, for bringing it up about what types of schools they have in this district, and the classical one is one that was lacking. And when I hear of parents that want to create a new charter school, and they say and they want to model it after something else, I look at what is that something else. We represent all the, even though we're different congressional districts, all the students in the state. And I went to Golden View and looked up their scores. And then I looked at your scores, which are very nice in our state, and thank you for all you do, and welcome aboard, Superintendent. You're drinking out of a fire hose for sure.
Just not two at once. That's my goal.
And I think Golden View, because it's classical and because it's in a different district, I look at what were their test scores? 2017, that's what I look at, and what do they look like now? And it looks like there's a lot of engagement, because there is engagement by charter schools. It's the parents. It's Mrs. Ganal that has stepped forward and said, I really want to have this charter school, and already has 350 parents with her. I think it would be a great addition. I think it would be a travesty if we didn't allow that to happen. I'm sure those parents, if they felt that they had all the choices they wanted, they would stay right where they are. I just wanted to put that in there and say we sometimes do our homework here, and I like it when parents and students have a choice, and we can sometimes let some of this other stuff get out of the way, especially if it doesn't go against our law.
Board Member McClellan.
I'm just wondering, for the applicant, when you learned of Boulder Valley's position, what would have been the reason for not simply remedying their concerns and reapplying at that moment? Would there have been an impediment to that?
Yield time or?
Yeah, right now, we are using up the time of the school district. If you
We
have
do want to
questions
answer
for
that
them.
question, though.
Okay. However, the question can be answered. Is there a mechanism?
We yield
No.
the remainder of the time for her question, and they can
So
start.
you're
their-
up for your 10 minutes?
Mhm.
Am I correct? Go ahead with.
Yes,
now you-
ma'am. And thank you for the question. I mean, we just heard it from them. They talked about how there was this engagement back and forth, and it culminated in this ultimate decision by the Board of Education. Again, they've represented that they would be happy to continue the conversation, and thankfully, if the State Board votes to remand today, we can continue that conversation, and we obviously would be willing to engage in that. We haven't received, as I said earlier, any indication, and to Director Durham's point, at great expense at this point, we haven't received any indication from the other side that the channels of communication or negotiation are open. Either party could have advanced that, I suppose, but I think we were both working off the assumption that a final decision had been made.
And forgive me, I'm operating at a slight disadvantage. I am not an attorney.
Sure.
I guess my question is, what would have prevented the withdrawing of the application that was seen as too deficient to even have been heard, and replacing it with an application aiming to answer those deficiencies so that you could begin afresh? Is there an impediment? Was there any impediment to proceeding in that manner?
We don't think so, but again, we didn't think that it was deficient, and I actually wrote it down when they said we didn't include a statement of rationale for our waivers. Well, this is from the Record on Appeal. Here's the statement. Here's the list of waivers from us. There's about 14 pages. And here's the stack of replacement policies. So we're left scratching our head what's missing. It's all here. Here is the template that they provide us. They said that this is inadequate. This is inadequate. The last one they approved looked like this. Now,
No, wait a minute. Was that the one that's a continuation
this
of
is
an
Peak to
existing?
Peak's renewal application.
Okay, so that's different than an original.
Right, this is what they provided us. It's in the Record on Appeal. They said, look at this and send us something that looks like this, and that's exactly what we did. So again, now they may have looked at this and said, it's inadequate, we don't like it, we don't think this is, we think this is an F and not an A, but now we're talking about substantive review. What they've said in the resolution is that it's missing, and that's what has us scratching our head. What's missing? It's all there. And this should have been substantively reviewed. They could have scored it an F. They could have said we don't like it. They could have said, you know, this doesn't cut the mustard. That's not what they said. They said it's missing things. We can't figure it out. It was said by the other side that this is a sophisticated group of founders. I'm lucky in my career that I get to work literally with dozens of charter school founders year in and year out. This is a sophisticated group of founders. They founded 2 other charter schools prior in Colorado. As mentioned by Director Rankin, one is very high performing. You know, this is not a crackerjack operation. They know what they're doing. This is a high quality application. It's not missing anything. We're puzzled as to why the district did not want to review this application, and again, review it on the merits. Give us some feedback about what they don't like about it, and then we can get into a back and forth about curriculum choices, or how we're going to serve ELL populations, or how we're going to we didn't even
That
get
is
there.
the question that you could have asked the day after the board meeting when it was pulled, and you did not. And apparently you thought they should contact you?
No.
Was I supposed to interpret it that way? That they could have
They
been-
could have, but
Right.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is if you're going to discount us, you got to discount them too. We interpreted it, and I would submit that both sides interpreted it based on the effort that's gone into this appeal as a final decision. I mean,
I think that's what Mr. Hood said. It was a final decision, and that they wouldn't reopen the thing at all under any circumstance, and that they want you to, if you want to proceed, you want to file another case. So.
Well, did he say that after
Madam-
the appeal,
Madam
though?
Chairman, no, this is.
Is that what you said?
No, it's not what he said.
Okay.
They clearly intended this to close the book on 2019 school opening. There's no question that's his own statement. Mr. Farmer, if Boulder Valley wanted to provide evidence of good faith in terms of sending you suggestions, methods to improve, could they cite 10 emails, 100 emails, 500 emails containing suggestions of substance on how to improve? How many of those could they cite in your, just give us an offhand number?
Yeah, well, I mean, we can look to the record on appeal. I would say there was probably less than 10 substantive responses. Maybe not that many.
There's a lot of background here that really isn't dealing with the incompleteness, but we did work to engage Boulder a number of things. We had a number of questions that are typically provided to an applicant, such as some financial information, special education information, a number of other things. And Boulder was not responsive at all. We did have a meeting with them at the last minute where we finally got some information really late in the game. So we, even as the application stage.
What would you say, I mean, you currently have a school in Douglas
and Jefferson County.
One in
yes.
Douglas and Jefferson. Would you characterize Boulder Valley's process as unduly more burdensome than either Douglas or Jefferson?
Well, we don't know what the Boulder Valley process is. Again, this is we submitted a complete application.
But more difficult, certainly, and less communication than you had from Douglas and Boulder?
I would agree with that, yes. Typically, most charter groups we've worked with have a information and guidance they provide to charter schools, such as what are your purchase services? Here's a list, here's an explanation. What are the expectations on special education? And ironically, we were actually told, don't worry about for your application. We negotiate that in the contract. So things that we thought were important to the application were put off to the contract phase. So it's turning this back on a technicality, claiming we didn't provide intents and replacement plans it's a little, it's hard for our parents to understand that rationale in Boulder denying the opportunity to them to have a school like this. CDE also has their model charter application rubric, and what we provided in our application using CDE's own rubric meets the requirements. I mean, this is the CDE application rubric itself. The claim that we don't even have a complete application when we score against the CD rubric and it shows us as meeting requirements, I mean, there is a disconnect there that we would love to know how we put together.
Could I speak to one thing, and it's not going to deal so much with the application technicalities, is what's at stake here. And I'm glad that Dr. Flores brought up some history, which is too infrequently appealed to when we're in the education game, although you would expect it would be appealed to all the time. I'm an historian of education, and what we're now calling classical education is the great tradition that this country inherited from their forefathers and continued in this country for a long time. And it went into demise back in the latter part of the 20th century. And in Colorado, among other places, it's really going through a rebirth, a renaissance. And what's interesting and frustrating is there are great classical schools in northern Colorado, and I helped open one of them in Fort Collins. There are great schools in the Springs that are well known throughout the country. There's now a school in Douglas County and one in Golden. There's not one in Boulder that's like this. And the irony of that is the University of Colorado at Boulder has the strongest classics department in the whole state. And so a great Latin master's or PhD coming out of there couldn't even stay in his own environment. And it's the one place in the state where you can't really send a Latin teacher. Now, it may seem crazy to you to talk about Latin, but I will tell you that there are parents out there who want those kind of subjects for their students because that's what's going to make them both smart and is going to ennoble their souls. And that's what we're in the business of doing.
Thank you. So I will just close by saying charter applicants deserve a better process than this. Charter applicants volunteered, like I said, hundreds of hours. I've worked with dozens of them on putting these applications together. Anybody that's ever worked on a major project before, I mean, how disheartening is it when you finally deliver it and the person you deliver it to won't even look at it? Charter applicants deserve better than this, and the families. We all know the standard is the best interest of the students, the community in the district. These students, Ms. Ganal's 3 children, the 350 plus intent to enrolls that want to send their children to a classical model in the Boulder Valley area, and that number will grow as the school gets closer to opening. They deserve a better process than this. They deserve a substantive review. They deserve feedback, and they deserve sort of a good faith approach by the district to determine whether or not Ascent is the right entity to provide that education, and if not, to provide some substantive, not technical reasons as to why. So in closing, we respectfully request that you send a message that these charter applicants do deserve a substantive review regardless of where they're at. And in this particular case, we respectfully request that you instruct the district to approve this quality application. Thank you.
I'd just like to make a few points in response.
Let me ask a couple of questions. Did you, so is the number of emails, substantive emails, suggesting positive ways to help and improve the education or improve the application, is 10 the number, or is it 100 or 500? How much communication was there really back and forth?
I'm not clear what you're asking. Are you talking about from families in support of the school?
No,
or
I'm talking
between
about
them?
in your communication. I mean, your claim is you tried to be helpful, tried to help them get an application put together properly. I'm just curious, you know, can you support that claim with, you know, we've got a stack emails this high, or is it 2 or 3 pieces of correspondence? We had somebody work every day with them, or we talked to them once a month. You know, there has to be some answer to that question.
I can't give you a number of emails or how many inches high the stack is, but I can tell you that our staff engaged with them at every stage. If they ever emailed us and asked us a question, we responded. We had multiple meetings with them. This idea that we weren't engaging with them is farce.
And then I think either you or Ms. Marquez said that it just wasn't worth the time of the staff to consider this application, and that was the reason that you decided to deem it incomplete and reject it. Is that
That's
correct?
not true.
That's am I going deaf here? Didn't one of you say that?
No. She said that it was one of the reasons.
I'm going to have this tape examined for that, and I'll bet you dollars to donuts you said it.
No.
Let's presume you did say it for a minute.
Okay.
All right. So you didn't consider the best interests of the children, which is the standard. You considered the best interests of the staff.
Mr. Durham, I believe the comment was that it was in response to a question by you about taxpayer dollars being spent or saved in certain ways. And I think that the comment was it in fact saves taxpayer dollars to not engage in what would turn out to be a fruitless review of an application that wasn't even sufficient to begin with, that did not submit the minimum components required by law. We're saving everybody time. It doesn't do the applicant any service to make them go through the review process and then on the back end say, well, we've got 411 waiver issues to deal with here. We're not satisfied with your explanation of how you're going to meet the intent of those policies, so we're going to deny this application, even though it sounds like you got a great school here. That doesn't serve anybody's interests, including theirs.
So your contention is that your decision is based on the best interests of the students in the district?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, so far I haven't heard any consideration of the quality of the program, their record in other districts. So far, none of that's relevant. The fact that they apparently produce a pretty superior result in other places.
We didn't get there. They didn't finish their application.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what we're here to talk about.
Right.
That's why we're here, actually. So I want to just address 2 things. The first is this idea that the stack of handbooks that they have provided us as part of their application somehow means that that's their replacement policies. Well, that's news to us, because when we asked them, please explain how you're going to meet the intent of all of our policies you want waived, they submitted a spreadsheet that said, A, these policies don't apply to us, which they did 235 times. 235 times. The other thing they said was, we will develop policy replacements in the future. They did not say, see handbook. They did not say, hey, check out our handbook from Golden View Academy, page 10. It addresses this exact policy, and this is how we're going to meet the intent of that policy we're waiving. They didn't do that. And because they didn't do that, they didn't follow the law and they didn't follow our policy. The law says if you're gonna waive a policy, you have to identify the policy and you've gotta tell us how you're gonna meet the intent of that policy. You can't just hand us a stack of papers and say, go at it, go fish through it. Are we supposed to scour through these 115 pages of handbooks to figure out how they align with our policies? I don't think so. They're the applicant, we're the authorizer, they do the work. That's how it works. The other point I'd like to make is that this idea that the peak-to-peak spreadsheet was identical to the spreadsheet they submitted. It is not identical. In fact, it is, in fact, substantively very different. It may look at 20 feet's distance very similar, but in fact, if you look at the two side by side, there are a couple of really different, major differences there. One is that Peak-to-Peak Charter School asked for, or they claimed that 11 policies didn't apply to them. Again, 235 versus 11. And the 11 that they said didn't apply to them actually could reasonably, you could argue, don't apply to them. And in fact, if you look at the policies that Boulder has, there are fewer than 20 that really don't apply or that you could argue don't apply, not 235. The other difference is that Peak-to-Peak Charter School actually said in their spreadsheet, we're gonna adopt the policy here, we're just gonna switch the people that are responsible for doing it. They didn't say, we will figure out a replacement policy or this doesn't apply. That's a major difference. If Peak-to-Peak had done what they did, we would have gone back to them and said, not good enough. But they complied with our rules, they complied with the Charter Act, so we approved their reauthorization, in part, or we deemed it complete. So I just want to address those two substantive points. I also want to address this idea that there's a groundswell of demand for this school. Again, we haven't reviewed the substance of the application, but I think it's telling that when the superintendent goes to every school in the district and talks to countless people, countless parents, you guys know Boulder, this is a place where people wear their opinions on their sleeves. If someone disagrees with a decision of the Boulder Valley School Board, you are gonna hear it and you're gonna hear it right away. And the superintendent is certainly gonna hear it in a public forum. Not one person came up to him and said, I disagree with your decision, or I disagree with the decision of the board. Not one person. Same thing with the president of the Boulder Valley School Board. Not one person has come to her. And I'd also mention, no one from the charter school bothered to show up at the vote when we deemed it incomplete. That's a little telling too. Instead, we got about 15 emails from people who may or may not live in the district, that many of which didn't even include addresses on the letters, saying, we support this school, don't deny the application. Nobody physically showed up to argue their case at the meeting. So, I mean, I think that's also very telling. And I would just close with this. If you order a remand in this case, and order the Boulder Valley School District to review this application on its merits, you are effectively sanctioning charter applicants, flouting state law, ignoring district policy, and letting them get away with it. And letting them get away with doing things they should have done as part of their application process. We're not here because we dislike their school. We're not here because we don't agree that the classical model would be good for kids. You know what? I think it sounds awesome. But you know what? They didn't submit a complete application. That's why we're here. That's why we deemed it incomplete. That's why it's denied. I yield the rest of my time unless you have questions.
Any questions? Thank you. Okay, now it's for us to discuss. Comments, questions? Colleagues? Board Member Rankin?
I have a question for Mr. Peters. Is that okay?
Legal counsel, yes. Sorry.
Thank you.
I was trying to figure out where Mr. Peters was.
Is this a correct statement, Mr. Peters and Ms. Tolson? Please jump in if you disagree. State law does not require charter applications to include rationales and replacement plans for district policy waivers.
So as we discussed earlier, I believe the statute is ambiguous and could be fairly read either way.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No comments or questions? Board Member Cullen?
Is it too late to ask Mr. Hood one last question?
Yes, it
All
is
right,
too late.
then I'll ask our legal counsel, is there any legal reason that would prevent this applicant from resubmitting in the format and under the guidelines requested or required by Boulder Valley School District the day after today's proceedings in the event that they don't go their way?
Nothing prevents them to resubmit.
Afresh.
Yeah, there's no legal prohibition on it. It wouldn't count for this year without an action of this board.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I will comment then first on what you just said. I think it's highly questionable that that paragraph that, I'm sorry, it is one sentence that you wrote.
Read the whole paragraph.
I think it's a serious question as to what it means, because it includes in two places the requirement that school district policy be followed, and one time where there's been an amendment in a subsequent act to change it. So this is highly ambiguous. One of the things we probably ought to think about is helping the legislature fix that. And I think we set an incredible precedent if we follow your interpretation, because then it would suggest that applicants do not have to address in replacement plans or in rationales any school district policies in the future. I want to say something about school district policies. Many of those policies, as I said previously, are based on recommendations from CASB, based on laws that are passed. But there are also a large number of them that reflect the community values of that particular community. And the schools, the kids that are going to be attending the charter schools in that community, probably at least the parents ought to know if a charter seeks to not follow that policy, that encases what's going to happen. So it's very important that our charter schools are very clear and transparent in terms of what policies they plan to follow and what policies either don't seem appropriate to them or for whatever reasons don't fit in their model. And if they're not required to include them, if this is actually the accurate interpretation of that, we totally eliminate that requirement. And we hide from charter parents what's actually going to happen for their kids when they apply at that charter school. And a number of the policies in Boulder or in any school district are simply about the community values, not about statute or federal laws that have been passed. So I find that to be really important. So I'm going to make a motion if there's no...
I have one more thing to
Sure.
add then. I agree with the last part of what you said, and I believe that this is in the best interest of the pupils. Oh, I'm sorry. I believe what you said about the community is important, and so I have to concur that this is in the best interest of the students and parents in the Boulder community that they are allowed to start their school. And go ahead, make your motion.
Yeah, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Durham?
I think there's another precedent that I think we need to address, and hopefully all of us can agree on this, that the law is ambiguous, and generally speaking, when things are ambiguous, they're interpreted to the applicant as opposed to the party that is administering the law. I think is a general rule of construction. But the greater issue is that we do know that there are a number of districts out there that are hostile to charter schools. Whether this district is one of them or not, we don't know, because it's been so long since they've really had an application. So they say they're not. I guess we'll have to take them at their word until there's other evidence. But the idea that, and during my years of federal service, the biggest way to obstruct the process for businesses getting permits, which is analogous to a charter school getting permission to do business, was the bureaucracy. There was no possible way to ever get a complete application. And in the position I had, I just had to intervene in a number of those and declare them complete, whether the staff liked it or not. And I don't know if that's occurred here, but it certainly appears, I think it's not unfair to say that the district did not make best effort to try and see that they, that the applicant was fully informed of the deficiency and the manner in which to correct them. I think it's probably also fair to say that the applicant could have done a better job in coming forward and trying to be a little more proactive. I think that's probably true too. But the result of this, and I think the best interests of the children really speaks for itself, because these schools tend to get among the very best results in the state, including the school in Fort Collins, which I think may be, they have the highest SAT scores in the state this past year, as I recall. So, so to somehow conclude that having a school like this in your district is not in the best interests of your students, that's a hard proof case. You know, particularly if they have any chance to perform at a level similar to the level they performed elsewhere. So, I think the net result is we're going to have a year of delay at least at a minimum. You know, unfortunately, the appetite is now wet for being able to find applications incomplete, and I hope the entire board would affirm that if the decision is that this application was incomplete, that there is an overwhelming body of evidence to that, and that we don't want to see this kind of thing before us as an excuse for failure to take action on a charter school application.
Yeah, I think there are some deficiencies on both sides. It's pretty hard for us to be accurate. But as much as the risk is, and I don't completely disagree with you that there is a risk that a district might use incompleteness when in fact an application is complete, there is also a risk that we're going to have a bunch of applications that are incomplete, that instead of completing them and working with the district and district staff, they instead come here and try to pull the same thing that we're pulling here today. So there are risks on both sides of this particular issue, unfortunately. This isn't just a great job anywhere on either side from what I can see.
I think I would agree with that analysis that there are potential risks for that, but I would say that this is the first time that in God knows how many charter applications have been made and have been brought to this board, that this is the first time that this is the kind of issue we get to deal with, as opposed to the substantive question of, is this in the best interest of the students? And I get the distinct,
I agree. You're right.
Distinct impression that there may not be possibility of a fair hearing, which is unfortunate in the district. But I guess time will tell, but it's quite clear that it's been a very long time since there's been a successful charter application in this district. This is a unique, high-performing...
Well, are you punishing them because nobody applied?
No. I just am observing that they cannot make the claim, since none of the board members have ever acted on acted favorably on a charter application, that it's hard for them to make the claim they're charter friendly. So, thank you.
Wait a minute. If they didn't have an application during that time period, Mr. Durham, it goes both ways.
Yes, I acknowledge that. None of them ever, they've only taken one action on a charter application, and it's a negative one. Yeah,
right.
So it's one for one.
Oh, you're suggesting the expansion isn't a positive?
I think that's what they said, that the expansion was not analogous. I think I'm taking them at their word that it wasn't analogous.
Well, I will agree that this doesn't look good on either side. It has the risk of setting a bad precedent from both sides of the aisle. There's no question in my mind. And I'm sorry that when it was refused, when the resolution was passed, that you didn't just start over right then. I really am. I actually can't figure out why you did that instead of pulling this trigger. It's been very problematic for me, but I move to deny the appeal on the grounds that the charter applicant has not proven beyond a preponderance of evidence that the local board decision was contrary to the best interest of the people, school district, and community, and therefore the decision of the Boulder Valley School District be affirmed. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Would you call the vote, please?
Board Member Durham.
No.
Board Member Flores.
No.
Board Member Goff.
I beg your pardon. Can you read the very first part of that?
Denies the appeal.
Yes.
Board Member McClellan.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
No?
Board Member Shuffle.
No.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
That motion fails.
Well, yeah, but I'm not making it.
Would you mind if I? It's okay?
Sure.
I move to remand the application to Boulder Valley School District on the ground that the decision of the local board was contrary to the best interest of the pupils, school district, or community.
Second.
Second.
You have a discussion?
I'd like to add an amendment.
Okay. What's your amendment?
That did not go through this year, but that we wait a year until they submit it, and then that it be taken seriously.
I think you missed that chance on the last vote.
I'm sorry?
I think you missed that chance on the last vote.
So, okay.
Do we have a?
I take it away. So
Second.
let's vote on it then.
Yep.
Or let it.
Call the roll.
What are we seconding here? I mean,
I second.
He said.
are we, you moved an amendment?
No, she
I'm
rescinded it.
taking it,
She withdrew it.
I withdrew it.
Board Member Durham.
Yes.
Board Member Flores.
Yes.
Board Member Goff.
Yes.
Board Member McClellan.
No.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle.
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Mm.
That motion passes. You said no, is that correct? Or yes, is that correct, Board Member Goff?
Yes,
Okay.
yes is correct.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes 6-2. 5-2.
Thank you, folks.
10 minutes.
Yeah, let's have a 10-minute break.
We need another.
Well, we've set a new precedent.
Yes. What they need is,
We'll pay for this one.
designated.
We'll pay for this one. That's okay.
So they're gonna
All right, let's get back to item 10.01, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get us back. We talked a little bit about this topic because prior to the agenda item, because Board Member Durham had to leave to catch a flight. So we're going to review a couple of the things just to get your head back into the space and to have some of our participants that came to see this particular presentation have them hear some of the same information. And then we will also, because we know this particular topic has a lot of interest from districts, we will make sure we send out the timestamp of Board Member Durham's comments so that you all can hear sort of how he framed his questions and his interest areas before he left today. So we'll make sure that we send that out to all of the districts and the accountability contacts. So I'm going to ask the staff to go through just a couple of those slides to reorient us to this particular topic. And then we are asking for a vote today on the targets. So I'll turn this over to Ms. Kishi.
Great. Good afternoon. So we want to talk this afternoon about areas of interest that we've talked about at the public board meetings over the past 2 months. Just a recap of that, and also set up for the voting on the 2019 performance framework target setting.
Make sure you get real close.
Okay.
It's hard.
Yep. So talking about target setting for the 2019 frameworks and a recap of the conversations we've had over the past few months. So this slide outlines the areas of interest that we've heard from the board and that we've been engaging with stakeholders across the state on over the past 2 or 3 months. The 3 areas of interest that we've really focused on have been setting achievement, growth, and PWR targets on the performance frameworks, the achievement, growth, and post-secondary and workforce readiness weighting on the performance frameworks, and also the addition of a new growth to standard metric to the performance frameworks. And so all of those areas we've kind of dug into a little bit over the past few months, and we'll dig into a little deeper during rulemaking for HB 1355 in spring 2019. We wanted to share the timeline for those conversations, and so right now at this meeting in November, the board will be voting on the 2019 targets for the performance frameworks, and we'll get into those targets a little later. And then we would like to have a conversation around target setting, weighting on the frameworks, and the addition of the growth to standard metric all together in the spring during rulemaking for HB 1355. That will allow CDE staff the opportunity to run models based on the different iterations of adjustments that could come forward, and it'll allow us to have a more engaged conversation across the state with all of our stakeholders around potential adjustments to the frameworks. That timing, though, does mean that any adjustments that will happen, the soonest they will come into the frameworks for points would be in the 2020 cycle. So those would be the frameworks that are released in August of 2020. So currently CDE staff is visiting established stakeholder group meetings and also responding to requests that we've gotten for individual sessions around these topics. All the materials that we've shared in those stakeholder meetings and board presentations are posted online. There's also a survey that's currently posted online to collect feedback from stakeholder groups. Public feedback sessions will also occur during the rulemaking process itself in the spring, and so there will be multiple opportunities for stakeholders to engage in the process and provide feedback and dig deeply into the conversations. If you would like to set up a session to provide feedback in person, you can definitely email CDE staff at accountability.cde.state.co.us. And if you have questions about rulemaking, we also have a contact there. So excited to engage in this conversation over the next few months. And the focus for today will be target setting for the 2019 performance frameworks. And just a grounding in statute, it is stated that the board shall set, reaffirm, or revise as appropriate, ambitious but attainable statewide targets for the measures used to determine the levels of attainment of the growth indicators, of the performance indicators, growth, achievement, growth to standard, and post-secondary workforce readiness for the coming academic year. And so again, the targets we're talking about today are the targets that will be on the 2019 frameworks released in the summer of 2019. And just a refresher of the specific targets we're talking about. Within each performance indicator, there are sub-indicators. So the example that's on the slide right now is that within academic achievement, we look at ELA, English language arts, in addition to math and science. And so within each sub-indicator, there are targets which are, in this example, the average scale score that a school or district would have to obtain to either meet targets or exceed targets, or be rated as approaching or does not meet. On the frameworks, which is on the top of the slide here, these targets are listed for each individual disaggregated group within a sub-indicator. And every school and district does receive a rating on those targets. So based on feedback and based on the timeline, the desired timeline for having all of these conversations around target setting and weighting on the frameworks, CDE does recommend keeping all of the sub-indicator targets for the 2019 school and district performance frameworks consistent with the 2018 targets and values. Again, this will allow time for CDE staff to create options for future target discussions encompassing framework targets, the growth to standard metric, and the discussion of the growth weights. So again, want to have that conversation holistically in the spring. And if we keep things consistent for 2019, that will allow us to have that time. The board did receive a list of values. The intent of that handout was to be just to show what the targets were in 2018 and keep those consistent for 2019. And so we wanted to spend or save a little time at the end for any questions or comments before going to the motion.
Board Member Sheffield?
Thanks for the report, appreciate it. So many of us have talked to superintendents and just trying to figure out their thoughts. And I think some felt they didn't quite have enough time really for feedback, or there wasn't enough pervasive feedback. Can you just talk about how you approached that and how you might approach it differently? You know, because we're going to be revisiting this, right, in spring. And so how might we ensure that, you know, we get voices of those in the field, their feedback?
So we're in the process. We've started meeting with different superintendent groups across the state. We have a list of stakeholder groups, and we're starting to put dates on those, and we're setting up those meetings currently. Actually, Ashley and I were today out at the Northern Soups meeting out in Windsor and met with that group this morning. So we're starting that process. We'll be reaching out, again, anybody that's wanting to set up, like Ashley said, anybody that's wanting to set up a time for us to come and speak with them, we're very willing to do that. We want to gather as much feedback as we can, get as much input as we can. So we're in that process.
And also just an acknowledgement that we won't be able to visit everybody in person, and so
Right.
we do have a survey that's up currently that will be revised as we get more information about growth to standard. And a lot of content that's on the website right now to say, you know, if you want to dig into these different areas, we have a lot of content there. Try to summarize the board conversations that have happened so far so folks can engage even if they're not able to attend an in-person session.
Go ahead.
Is growth to standard is a new metric, correct?
No,
So
it's an old metric that we took off.
Okay, so it's being revisited.
It's
Okay.
being replaced because we couldn't use it while we were changing assessments.
Okay.
So it is one that we had previously.
Okay, good to know. And then when we revisit this, the history is always helpful. Because what some of the districts will say is, hey, we have to message to our communities around these, how our district is viewed. And
Right.
so it's helpful to know, here's what the standard was this year, and then it didn't change for 2 years, and then it changed, and then it didn't change. So I mean, kind of seeing the whole big picture is helpful.
Yes.
Just to get a sense of how districts and communities have to deal with this data, and how they might use it, and how it might be messaged and interpreted to the community.
Yeah, that's one of the main, we hear that question with most of the groups that we go out to speak to, are interested in the history. So why are we where we are right now?
Right.
How do we get here, and what are our next steps moving forward? So we've been able to talk through that. We have some resources that speak to that, but are generating more as well, and hoping to put that online as well, so folks can dig into that.
And that was why I told you about what Joyce and I heard, which was try to figure out a way to the extent there's a change in the, and there is a change, there's, by definition, there's going to be a change in the factors. Can we then go back so that our soups can go to their communities and say, had these 3 factors been in there, it would have been this, this, and this. I haven't figured out how you can do that, given that growth to standard was eliminated for a really good statistical reason. I think there's still a desire on the part of the districts to be able to show change going back a couple of years to today.
Yeah.
So we're not just tossing in a new number. I'm sorry, I
Just-
think I
yeah.
cut you off, Commissioner.
Just the idea so that districts know what is, in the public, what is real change, what is change based on an artifact
Exactly.
of changing the metric or the number of variables or whatever.
Right.
And I just wanted to clarify too, because some of this happened really quick, and I think lots of different messages and swirls sort of got out there really quick. So we were responding in requests to the board for some questions you had around targets and this normal process that you have to do every year in setting targets. So we responded to some of those requests, and I think in reflection, we didn't do a good job of explaining to the field that we were responding to these requests. But you all, we heard a lot of feedback, and so we've talked with all of you. You all have heard to say, let's slow down. Let's look at all these things in tandem. Let's have time for a thoughtful process where we model out a ton of different options and we get time for feedback from everybody to look at those options. And the point I want to make here is you guys are totally in control of this timeline. Granted, the new statute does require us to make some changes to the rules, but I think we are recommending and we are supportive of, we know how intense these decisions are and how many implications they have around the field. And so really, you guys can dictate sort of how long this particular conversation, how many months we have to get the appropriate feedback. Our team is working right now to generate a long list of meetings, and we've also been seeking out folks, asking if we can come to their meetings. But we do want to make sure that this is a very thorough, thoughtful process where we get a lot of different input.
So I want to just share a little bit of history. I mean, I think you were there, Jane was there, when we were setting the targets a long time ago. At that time, we did not say these targets are forever. They were normed. Part of it was normed, and we said that this is where we would start, and that at some point we would be looking at changing them. The goal has always been that as we see improvement, we don't just say we're done. And so there has to be some thoughtful way for us to look at to continue to have high but achievable goals. And what Mr. Durham pointed out to us is, looks like we're really high right now in terms of the number of districts that in fact are at performance or even higher. And that's not the results that we actually see in terms of the student outcomes. And so we just need to align that, number one. And number two, be thinking about how to gently push the envelope without doing any harm and making sure that everybody understands exactly what it is that we're doing. So we really are doing the job that we said we would do way back when we started setting these standards. Board Member Flores.
So, but if we do this, I mean, wouldn't we have a larger number of districts that we would have to do, I mean, that we would have to work with? And I'm concerned, I mean, that do we have the resources to help that larger number of districts that are going to come under the radar when we reset these things?
I think, Board Member Flores, that's a really
I
good
think that's what
point.
we're
And
worrying about.
I think that's what we want to model out. So we want to model out a lot of these different options, and what does that look like? Where do districts and schools fall? And then, what support do we have to be able to give? But we need the time to do that modeling, to be able to have really clear answers for you on that, because we don't know yet.
And that's not to say that they're not deserving.
Oh, no,
No,
yes, everybody's deserving.
Deserving and
Mhm.
probably deserving right now, but
You know, one of the things that I think about sometimes in looking at this, it's very possible that as we look at either other factors or just other weights, that it's not the bottom that we now identify that's going to substantially change. For example, one of my personal concerns is that we have districts of distinction that have schools that are in turnaround. And I just have to ask myself, what is that distinction? So there are other ways to look at this, and I think as staff has said, that they're going to give us all sorts of ways to look at different ways of looking at the data that we have. We're not prohibited actually from having additional factors in our analysis. For example, ESSA did require us to add a measure. So we're not limited to what we've done up to now. We're certainly not limited to the formula that we used when we had growth to standard before. I don't think it was very clear to people anyway. So it is going to be a matter of looking at a lot of different combinations and permutations. But we want to have some kind of an alignment with only 40% of our third graders. I mean, Steve was kind of suggesting that 60% of our kids are not proficient. Third grade reading, we have that. Fourth grade reading, there are more. There's a higher percentage, so we have to be careful what we say here. But some kind of an alignment between how this looks, how the frameworks suggest a status, and what's actually happening for kids' achievement
and you know,
and growth.
one of my concerns is that we have had ESSA just, 2 years that it's been kind of on the books, but
Agreed.
yet we had No Child Left Behind for several years, and No Child Left Behind really targeted a child that was on the brink of, getting there, getting to proficiency. And Dr. Scheffel and I were talking about this earlier, and I'm wondering whether the staff, the teachers out there in Colorado have kind of made that change, that we need to help those kids that are really, kind of below that. Not just the kids that are on the brink of getting to
On the borderline.
on the borderline, that's right. And it really hurt me when I was teaching that was going on, because the resources were being expanded only to those kids on the borderline and not to kids below. And yeah, and so it just seemed so unfair. And I'm wondering if district administrators have had discussions with staff about the issue that it's not only these kids that we have to help, but it's all the kids that we have to bring up.
I think the reason we use the measures we do are for exactly that reason, that we're not only looking at the kids that are on the border, that we are
Right.
looking at all kids.
Yeah, but I think that as board members and other board members, and we understand, these things, and we talk about this, but then you wonder how much that has filtered down to the teachers. Even this whole thing with this test, I mean, this is not for, it's not for parents. It's for the state board. It's for the state board to give this evidence to the feds, and it's not really about kids and parents and teachers. So I'm.
Board Member McClellan.
I actually do appreciate getting the data from my son's testing, and it tells me where he stands in relation to the progress of his peers at his school, across his district, and across the state of Colorado. And if I were to look at that district data versus the state of Colorado data, I do not have a concern about the district where my son goes to school, but if I were in a district where those numbers pointed out for me a serious concern, I would appreciate knowing about it, because it's hard to advocate for that which you cannot prove. So if we do have an overweighting of schools and districts in the upper two categories, it's important that we go back, that we do a look back, and we make sure that this is aligning with the greatest transparency that we can produce. But I know that staff does want to take the time to make sure that we're rolling this out correctly once, so that we have a quality framework as we look to address that concern with those top two categories. And not in any effort to cut off any debate or discussion, I just wanted to put a motion on the floor just to keep us moving, knowing that people can certainly debate and discuss after this. I move to approve the targets for the 2019 school and district performance frameworks as proposed by CDE. These targets are in alignment with those of the 2016, 2017, and 2018 performance frameworks.
Do I have a second? Thank you. Sheffel?
Okay. Can we?
Wait.
Do you want to jump in?
Yep.
We may have an amendment to the motion, just because go ahead.
Yes. So the targets that were handed to the board members last week, there is an error in that document. We want to make very clear that we don't want to approve targets that are not the same as 2018. And so we want to adjust the motion so that we can approve the same targets as 2018, but make sure that we note that we want to update that document so that they match. Is that right? Yeah. So.
Well, I think that's what, I think that's. Isn't that what you read, what you wrote?
Okay, we just want to make it clear that it wasn't.
Get it perfectly clear here.
Oh.
I move to approve the targets for the 2019 school and district performance frameworks as proposed by CDE and update the 2019 frameworks scoring guide dated November 2nd, 2018 to ensure that the SAT cut scores match the 2018 targets. These targets are in alignment to those in the 2016, 2017, and 2018 performance frameworks.
Oh. Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, Board Member Sheffel. All right, now, who you want to?
I had a few questions before, and now I have 1,000.
Yeah. There you go.
On the page where it has the 2019 target setting, that is November 2019, which is actually in the 2019-2020 school year. I mean, sometimes we talk about 20.
18, 19. Oh, yeah.
I'm
good question.
confused about, I think of a school year as 18, 19, 19, 20, and I'm very confused about this conversation, and I tell you what page I'm on, but I have no idea on that either.
Number your
And
pages.
on, it says it's the current State Board of Education conversation timeline. 2020 target setting conversation. Now, that to me looks like it's the 2019 and 2020 school year, correct?
So the 2019, when we say 2019 target setting, we're setting targets for the 2019 frameworks, which reflect data that was collected in the 18-19 school year. And so this motion is related to the frameworks that will be released in August 2019, next summer, that will reflect the current school year's data.
But
so
in
when we talk
but
about
in February, I think, if I heard you, understood you correctly, in February, we will be talking about the targets for the subsequent year.
For the
which will
next
be
year.
1920. Even though we're
In
starting.
February here, this
like-
February is 1929,
No.
but it's February 2020.
It's February.
So we are, so I would say within the bubbles, when it says 2020 target setting, we can change that to the target setting for the 1920 school year is what we're going to be talking about there. In November, when it says 2019 target setting, where it's talking about targets for the 18-19 school year, and this is all happening.
So in
2019.
We're going to start talking about this in spring of 2019.
Okay, so we're going to start talking, which says to me, we haven't done anything yet. We're just starting to introduce and talk about something new. No.
Yeah, we
Yeah?
just said that for the current year.
Yes, the
we are
current
maintaining.
school year,
for the
which
current-
is 18-19.
Correct.
We're going to maintain everything.
Right.
Then we're going to talk about it 19-20,
in February of 2019. In other words, we're lining up our ducks in order to be sure that school districts know exactly.
Yeah, and I
what would be-
understand what it's for, but so when is it gonna affect the superintendents? Let's put it that way.
So if we have a deeper conversation during the rulemaking process in spring of 2019, so starting in 3 months, about any adjustments we want to have with any of the framework calculations, the earliest that those adjustments could be implemented in the frameworks would be the 2020 frameworks, which reflect the 1920 data.
Okay, so it could happen as soon as September of 2019.
The data from that school year?
Yeah,
Yes, it would affect the data for that school year.
As far as the superintendents are
Yep.
concerned, that would be the one, the
be-
scores would be affected.
But
for
the data for the
2020.
the data for the 1920 school year comes out in August of 2020.
Yep, okay,
So
I'm
it's
getting it now.
essentially two
So-
frameworks from now.
Okay. I'm just, and I'm sure the superintendents understand it's coming, but I don't know if they know, exactly when. Whatever it is, it's gonna be too soon, you understand that.
So so I would say the frameworks that are going to be released in summer of 2020.
Okay, so,
Is the earliest
and they
anything
will
would happen.
include this growth to standard metric, and this growth to standard metric, we have to do because of law, and the performance framework target setting, the performance indicator weighting, all of that stuff that we have in our frameworks, which is normative, is required by law, correct?
It's not required by law to be normative,
No,
but it's required
to have those,
in there.
okay, ratings.
Right,
That's
so performance
one of the things we
indicators
argue
are
about, or I
indicated
argue
by law,
about.
exactly. But then the board, and we will have this conversation about where the board has flexibility. It is around the methodology for sure, and around the weighting as well, that sits in board rule.
Is this legitimate? If we're talking about normative here, and the parents are looking at the test scores or their child's test scores in school, and that's criterion reference, are we not comparing, and I know I've asked you this before, Mr. Dillon, are we not comparing apples to oranges? And is that why the discrepancy between the frameworks and the test scores?
So I would say two
Bingo.
things. Our frameworks are somewhat of a hybrid, right? So the methodology by which we set the targets is normative. So we set the meets bar at the 50th percentile, but then we do baseline that, right? So it doesn't
yeah, the
adjust every
15%.
single year.
Yeah.
So districts and schools can show growth on that,
Yep.
which kind of bridges that gap a little bit. We also have, with growth to standard, we're going to have a new metric that is very tied to underlying criterion. The second point, though, is that there are two different types of data, right? So when you're looking at individual student data, it's different than looking at average data. And so there are different methodologies for looking at that data and trying to determine what's best.
So it's not really fair at all to compare them anyway. And are we tweaking the one just to make it a little more palatable for the public? And it just doesn't seem right.
So let me jump in here. I mean, I think this is at the board's discretion around how you set the targets and how you set the weightings. Now, the growth to standard metric is in statute, so we have to sort of add that back in. But all of these conversations that you all have brought to us in terms of, you guys started the conversation around seeing a misalignment. And so that's what we're talking about. But I do think you're bringing up a good point, that these types of things measure are useful. Their purpose is for different things.
Yes.
And so you might not ever get to a point where those things are perfectly aligned, because in Colorado we do have a value that's in statute around growth. And so if we have a value around growth, that means the accountability frameworks will never have a perfect alignment to proficiency, because we also have a value to see how students are growing. So that is the conundrum. You've hit on the conundrum of bringing it into closer alignment with achievement, and that's why these conversations are so complex.
And that kind of definition, I'm sure, is what all this discussion's going to be about. But it is something that Angelica and I heard about at our superintendent meeting. And some of the things they say, or some specific ones said to me, we value growth more than we value the test scores, but yet the parents sometimes value, so there's a lot of misalignment there.
What was the word
And
you-
just weighting that differently, you know, well, we'll just tweak it a little to make it look better is not doing justice to what we're really testing here. So I hope what we're really doing in the frameworks really is justifiable and not something we can tweak to make people happy, let's just say that. And these are things I think that are very, very important to come up in this discussion, and it may kick that can down the road a little more to find something a little more perfect, but you're the ones that are looking at other states and seeing what they're doing, and I think what you bring back, if they have these 3 areas, we may be unique, I'm not sure, but I think that's something we have to look at very, very carefully to make sure we're not just doing something for the sake of the visual, if that makes sense.
Let me try a term that was used previously, Joyce, that might help. I think I'm correct here, so feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, but we didn't used to call it growth to standard. We called it adequate growth.
That's
So that's a more of a
understandable.
tie, in my mind, that's more of a tie between growth and growth measures a lot of the value added from teachers and everybody else, but the value added in a year to a student's achievement, and are they getting to proficiency? So I know we've changed the terminology for whatever reason, but that actually made more sense. What's adequate growth for this student?
And,
Go ahead.
and Denver, isn't Denver still using
that term?
Adequate growth, or at least they have a metric for
Yeah, do
showing
we-
that?
I don't know
Do
if
we have
they,
a
if they
definition of-
probably had to drop it
Haven't
also,
they
didn't they?
kept it?
I'm not sure if Denver is still using that, but that is the philosophy behind that metric,
Right.
is that we're showing students' growth towards a singular point at grade bench, it happens to be grade level
I'm
expectations.
sorry, but you said a long, long time ago, and I think adequate growth is very important. I mean,
Absolutely.
And I think that my district, Denver, if they don't, I think I hear a lot about it, that they want to know that the school where their kids are attending the school is making adequate growth towards, towards becoming proficient. And if we're talking of standards as, are we talking about standards as, I think, we have standards, of course, but then we have a standard of what is, what I would call being at grade level. And that, to me, I call that is a very, a positive standard. And then we have standards. So I think that's very positive to have.
Positive.
I just wanted to make a clarification really quickly around, we mentioned, Joyce, Ms. Rankin, when you're talking about the timeline, that the earliest that we could have any adjustments would be in the frameworks would be 2020. The board does have discretion over that timeline as well, so it doesn't have to be 2020, it could be later than that as well.
kinda
Again, we
got
can
that.
give ourselves time to have
Yeah.
as much of a conversation as we need.
But not earlier.
Not earlier.
Definitely not.
And you know,
early.
if we did something like adequate, I mean, that to me is, we'd have to define that word.
Yeah.
Well, and the way it was defined previously
Okay.
may not be the same way
Yes, we define it now.
mathematically,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
The formula.
And
might-
that's,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
But
depending.
then,
we're gonna be in some nasty weeds.
excuse me, may I? But if, I mean, I'm old school, and if you say adequate growth, you have a semester and you make, I understand what adequate growth means in September through December. I also understand what adequate growth means from January to May. And I hope that that equals to a whole year of adequate, of a standard another use of the word standard, standard growth for a child. So, I mean, you know, I remember the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, the California Achievement Tests, and that's how we used to speak about adequate growth. At, you know, it was either 7 point whatever, but it meant months that you were growing. And people knew what that meant, and they knew what that meant for many decades, I think, in this country. So I don't think, well, it may be new to a new generation, but I don't think it's something that is completely new. I mean, completely new to our awareness.
And we will get very deep into the details around growth to standard as it's being built. But we'll say that CDE staff is working really closely with our technical advisory panel right now to address all of these questions around how we build a metric that's useful at the student level, at the school and district level, and does answer that question of, are we making enough growth to reach grade level?
Just one more thing. I don't want to get in trouble for saying that bucket is an ugly word again, as we did 4 years ago. But couldn't we speak about growth to standards as adequate growth? Because I think adequate growth has meaning to me, whereas growth to standards, as I think try to explain.
How about we jump into all that?
No.
Board
wait a
Member
minute.
Val.
Standards,
Board-
the word standard has a lot of.
May I finish?
A lot of
sentence?
meanings.
How about we
And
get to
so-
that discussion when we get to that discussion instead of
Well,
making
but-
some decisions now so that
No, I'm
we
not
can all
thinking of
respond?
making decisions. All I'm saying is just, I'm just proposing. I'm just not saying that we're going to be making that decision, because I think adequate growth means more than growth to standards.
Thank
The
you.
term.
Any other
Um,
comments? Are we ready to vote?
Perfectly clear now, thank you.
No, I did just want to thank, I want to thank our colleagues at Westminster for bringing up the mistake in the scoring guide so that our motion does reflect what we actually mean. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Where was the scoring guide?
It was in the materials, and the motion referred back to the materials. But if the materials were incorrect, then we would be referring to the wrong stuff. And
Thank you.
their eagle eye caught it for us. And so we got
Thank
to
you.
clarify the,
Put them on the committee.
Yep.
I know, you guys just got some new jobs. No, you're on the committee now. They probably are on the committee. So, so I
Are we
think
ready for a vote?
I think so.
Folks?
On adequate growth.
No, not on adequate.
Do you remember what the motion is? It's the motion to
It's the
maintain
motion on
our
the screen.
targets. Oh, good.
Yeah, it's right there.
Board Member Durham,
Absent.
Board Member Flores,
Yes.
Board Member Goff,
Yes.
Board Member McClellan,
Yes.
Board Member Rankin,
Yes, and thank you for that presentation.
Board Member Shuffle,
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously.
Thank you. And if the mean were just on those two, we'll have lots of time.
I think we're ready to talk about, have a presentation on the commissioner's decision concerning district accreditation ratings.
Correct. Yes, thank
Thank
you, Madam
you.
Chair. This occurs every year in statute. I'm the one that makes the decisions on district accreditation ratings, and you all are the ones that make the decision on school accreditation ratings. So the same team of folks are here to present on this for you. So turning it over to Mr. Dillon.
All right, well, thank you, and we'll try to be concise with this one as well. So this is an information item only. Talking about the accreditation ratings for districts. So Jessica Watson is who manages this process for the district, or for the, excuse me, for the state. And she's, yeah, I'm at the state now, I gotta remember that. However, she works across many units and works with lots of groups of people looking at this. So there's a pretty broad view when they sit down and take a look at these district accreditations. And so I wanted to share with you What our agenda is to just kind of give you some background and overview of the process, the request to reconsider process, and then the 2018 district results, what schools are still on the accountability clock, and then some next steps for this process. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to actually Ashley Pesci will talk you through some of the background and overview of the district accreditation process.
So, the Education Accountability Act of 2009.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Oh, yes.
Totally off the subject.
Yeah.
How hard would it be to have that stuff over here?
To switch the brain. Yeah.
Well, colleagues, I don't know what about you, but
The audience, we have a bigger audience.
oh, the audience.
Yes.
Okay, we like you guys.
And then usually we have.
I have more trouble. Yeah,
But you could read it on your page.
I know. Got it.
Well, if I was Al Roker, the weatherman, I'd just swipe it with my finger and it'd go over for you. But I can't do that.
We had a smart TV.
We all have to have our personal goals. Okay?
Working on it.
Work on it.
Preference.
Okay, sorry. I wish it weren't way over there, but yes, I'll look at this.
Yep. That's good.
Or is that not focused?
Yeah, it's focused.
She's blind. Never mind. She's blind. Okay, go ahead. Oh, cool.
Got fixed.
Mikey, thank
Mike.
you.
Oh my gosh.
We appreciate you.
SB 163 requires an annual review of district and school performance. So districts annually receive a district performance framework, and schools receive a school performance framework. Pursuant to the rules for administration of statewide accountability measures for the Colorado Public School System, the department provided to each district in August the data used by the department to conduct its analysis of the performance of the public schools in the district, and provided an initial recommendation concerning the type of plan that the school should implement, a performance improvement, priority improvement, or turnaround plan, and for districts, that additional distinction category. Districts were given the opportunity to submit by October 15th additional data for consideration. The district accreditation plan types that the department is now submitting represent recommendations that are either the same as the initial recommendations made by the department, or recommendations that represent an agreement reached by the department and those districts that elected to submit additional data for consideration. I think this is about the frameworks, right? So the purpose, again, of the frameworks is to identify those schools and districts whose student performance is low in relation to state goals, and direct state support and intervention appropriately, and also to identify districts and schools whose students are of the highest performing, to recognize them and learn from their practices. And again, a quick overview of the ratings that districts receive. So for district accreditation ratings, there are 5 main categories, with the top being accredited with distinction, down to accredited with an improvement plan, accredited with priority improvement, or accredited with a turnaround plan. And districts can also receive that insufficient state data rating if they do not have enough data to populate a report, or have a low tested population. Descriptors are added to the district accreditation ratings, and these descriptors describe the level of participation within the district. And so those descriptors are meets participation, low participation, if districts have a participation rate that's below 95% in 2 or more content areas on the frameworks, or a decreased due to participation if participation is below 95% once parent excusals are taken out of the equation. And then a reminder of what goes into these frameworks. Under academic achievement, we're looking at achievement within English language arts, math, and science, overall and for disaggregated groups. That accounts for 40% of the total points that elementary and middle schools receive, 30% of the total points that high schools and districts receive. For academic growth, we look at growth within English language arts and mathematics for overall and for disaggregated groups. And that accounts for 60% of the points that elementary and middle schools receive, and 40% of the points that high schools and districts receive. And then for high schools and districts, we also look at post-secondary and workforce readiness, which includes graduation rate, overall and for disaggregated groups, dropout rate, and matriculation rate. That accounts for 30% of the points that districts and high schools receive on the frameworks. And now I'll pass it on to Jessica, who will talk through the request reconsider process.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So just to give a little background around the request to reconsider process, if a district analysis of performance for the district or school is different than the department's initial assignment of an accreditation category for the district or the department's initial assignment of a school plan type for any of the district's schools, the district may submit additional information for the department's consideration through the request to reconsider process. So as Ashley mentioned, district had until October 15th to submit additional evidence for the commissioner's consideration. CDs supported districts by reviewing drafts submitted by September 15th and provided detailed feedback along with offering individualized office hours for support. 32 districts participated in the draft process, and we received 10 district draft submissions for the DPF and 58 school draft submissions for their school performance framework, their SPF. For the overall requests that we received in final format for the request to reconsideration, we had 22 district requests compared to 20 last year, and then over 160 school requests, including 60 schools which Denver Public Schools requested to lower the rating. And then overall that 160 is compared to the 140 requests that we received last year in 2017.
Now, is that fair that Denver did that?
So the department will only consider requests that meet one or more of the conditions for a request to reconsider as outlined on this slide in assigning a different district accreditation category or school plan type from the initial rating given through the district or school performance framework report. So those conditions for a request to reconsider are body of evidence, accountability, participation, impact, calculation error, impact of alternative education campuses on the district performance framework rating, retroactive alternative education campus designation, small districts and schools, districts with a single school, districts with a closed school, and insufficient state data rating. So the board has received a handout with the district names, requested ratings, and rationale, and the CD decisions, the commissioner's decisions regarding these requests for reconsideration. So for the districts, we had 17 approvals. 4 were based on the impact of alternative education campus students on the district performance framework rating. That means, in summary, that the district rating increased when the AAC students were removed from the framework, and that the AAC received an AAC rating of performance, or the AAC was improvement and has demonstrated improvement over time. 4 were based on using a single school rating for the district, 4 based on accountability participation rate, 3 based on body of evidence of supplemental data, 2 based on request for insufficient state data, 1 based on consideration for a small system, and 1 based on closing grades within a school. And these numbers were fairly similar with last year as well.
Can you explain or give me an example using a single school rating for the district?
Yes, that would be
I'm
for a
confused.
very small system where they just had one school in the district.
And? So
Yeah,
can you give me an example of why the rating needed to be changed based on you're saying that the rating came out different between the school rating and the district?
It could be. It could be in a case of where there was an alternative education campus in the one system. That would be a BOCES in this case, where they just have one school they authorize. That's an alternative education campus, so we use the AAC rating for the overall BOCES rating for the district or authorizer. Yeah.
And the AAC framework has more flexibility built into
It
it,
does.
so the calculations are not the same as a traditional district performance framework.
Mhm.
That's why those ratings could be different.
Find me an example later on, but not right now, because I don't
We
think
can
I
talk
get
about
it.
the one that was
Thanks.
approved, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Get into that now.
I'll do it later. I don't want to
Okay.
interrupt it, but
Okay.
I'm missing something.
Okay, for those requests not approved, we had 4 of those. 3 based on the fact that additional supplemental data did not support a higher rating. 1 based on the fact that the accountability participation rate was not met. In addition, we have 1 pending school decision, which is based on the outcome of the 1 pending district, which is based on the outcome of the school request to reconsider, which will come to the board next month. And so finally, for this. If the district receives a priority improvement or turnaround rating, the local Board of Education may submit an appeal to the State Board of Education within 10 days of final notification from CDE. And the State Board Office coordinates with the local school board to schedule that hearing. And now I'll turn it back over to Ashley.
You can address that question too. What was the one district with the single school? Was it an AC?
Yes, that was, we'll check, I think that was the.
So we can get the name of the
River
district that
BOCES,
had
yeah.
the River BOCES?
Yeah, the Colorado River BOCES, yeah.
So
That has
that's
an
a
AEC.
district that has only one school,
Mhm.
and that school is an AEC school.
Mhm.
And the rating
Mhm.
criteria are different for AECs than for
Yes.
districts, and that's why it was changed.
It was actually the Colorado River BOCES,
Mhm.
on the western slope over in
Mhm.
Bend.
Yep.
So that was the BOCES, and it has an AEC, an alternative education campus within the BOCES.
And that's the BOCES, I mean,
Yes.
that's the school.
That's the school, yes.
Thank you. Makes sense now.
All right, so we'll talk through the final district accreditation results. So we presented preliminary results in September, is that right? And now we're coming back with the final results after having gone through the request to reconsider process. And so at a high level, 14% of our districts earned a rating of accredited with distinction, 54% earned a rating of accredited, 27% earned a rating of accredited with an improvement plan, 3% earned a rating of accredited with priority improvement, and 1% earned a rating of accredited with a turnaround plan. And we had 3 districts, or 2% of our districts, that received an insufficient state data plan. This next slide shows the overall distribution of district ratings over time, with the light green being 2016 and the dark blue being 2018. And so
That's the flip of that.
and so those ratings have stayed pretty consistent over time, again, with the majority of the districts falling within that accredited category. Oh, it's flipped, yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have
Board
a
Member
question.
Flores.
So, when you, accredit these districts with distinction, usually you do it on a bell curve and you do the average of all the kids? Or how do you come to the conclusion? Like, for instance, I'll ask about Boulder. How many students in Boulder do we have that are not meeting, are not at grade level? Do you?
So we can look that up based on the
And-
subject that's being tested, but to your question around how the distribution of districts is determined.
Right.
So that is determined on an order basis.
No, actually, I'm asking within district. Like, for instance, you could have an average where, if you look at the mean of means, it could be, very huge between kids that are doing well and kids that are not doing well, especially if those kids that are doing well are way up here and the kids that are not doing well are way down here. So,
So at the school and district level, we do look at the average scores of how students are performing within the school or the district. And so
Right.
that you can have variation there, right? So you can have
Right.
a school that has an average, if points are from 0 to 100, an average of 50, but students that are down at 1 and students that are up at 99.
Right.
And that looks different based on the grouping of students.
right. So, I guess what I'm getting at is, you could have, and of course we know that we probably do, have students that are very low, and so growth is important, for who's growing, who's not growing. But I wish we could have it so that we knew that indeed, minority students, and I'm talking about kids that are, special in many ways, gifted, and maybe would have an infirmed. We're talking about ESL kids, we're talking about kids that are minority in, racially minority, female versus male, or not, I don't mean verse, but either, and so that we know rural. And I think I've had discussions with Board Member Rankin that, you know, she considers some rural kids as minority in a sense that they would, you know, they're special in their own way. So that when we know that kids are growing, and I know that we have that metric that says, you know, this is the growth achievement. And do we, sometimes I think some groups get, I'm thinking of A+, who gets, you know, really concerned that they don't have, you know, the data to show how well ESL kids are doing, because we can only, some districts are so small that, you know, you can't give out the number of kids because of the N, you know, number that is there.
Say for the framework data, we do look at those averages, and those averages are correlated to performance within the district, right? So if you have a district that has a high average scale score,
right,
that does mean that their students are, you know, concentrated around that scale score to some degree, right?
Yeah.
That is correlated to percent of students on benchmark, and so we've done that correlation. And then on the frameworks, we do report in mean scale score, so that we can report on those disaggregated groups a little differently than when we release just raw assessment data.
Right.
And so on the frameworks, we do report on minority students and students who are English language learners and students with IEPs.
But
And
not most
vast
districts.
majority of districts and schools do receive that data because we do report it on an
Okay.
average level and not at percent benchmark, which does further limit our ability to produce that data.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so then movement within districts. 69% of districts received the same plan type in 2017 or 2018 as they did in 2017, right? 14% of districts increased at least one level, and 7% of districts increased at least one level from their preliminary 2018 rating as a result of going through the request to reconsider process. So that takes into account those 13 districts that did move up a level. So to talk about the participation impact, 3 districts did receive insufficient state data ratings. Each of those districts did have insufficient state data ratings due to low participation, meaning that total participation at the district was below 95%. 9 districts whose final ratings were decreased due to accountability participation rate below 95% in 2 or more content areas. And then we have 59 districts receiving plan ratings with low participation description due to participation rates below 95% in 2 or more content areas. We did have 25 districts that were accredited with distinction for 2018, and they are listed on the slide here. The districts that have an asterisk next to them are the districts that reached a distinction through the request reconsider process. All right, and then brief slide on the accountability clock. This is a slide that we show each year that outlines the original cohort of districts that were on the clock in 2010 and where they are now. In 2018, we have 4 of those districts that remain on the clock, 2 that are in year 8, so have been consistently on the clock, and 2 that have bounced back on in 2018, those 2 being Cortez and Sheridan.
Board Member Shuffle.
Well, I just had a question about, there's a valence between how much growth gets counted and how much achievement gets counted, both at the school and the district levels, right? Is there any allowance made for the fact that a school that's achieving very highly already has very little room to grow, so they might actually fall back in terms of how they're accredited because their achievement is high, but their growth is low because they're already at the 98th percentile or whatever, as opposed to a school that is overall achieving lower, has lots of room to grow, but their achievement is low. So, I mean, is there some kind of allowance made for that so that schools don't get stuck where they are, unable to move for the wrong reasons?
Yeah, so the growth that we talk about at the school and district level is the median growth percentile. So we're looking at the median of the student growth percentiles within schools and districts. Those student growth percentiles are calculated by comparing students to cohorts of students that perform similarly to them. So if you're a high-performing student, you're being compared to students who perform similarly to you. And we're saying that you either grew more than students who had a similar score to you the previous year or grew less than those students. So there's always room to grow at the student level, no matter where you are on the performance levels of the assessment, if that makes sense. And because that is the case, when we look at it at the school and district level, it means that there's always room to show growth despite where your students are on the underlying performance levels.
Is that something that would be good to look at in a detailed way to see actually how it works? In other words, I see you're using the median, so you're comparing students, let's say, who are in the 95th percentile with others in the 95th percentile and looking at how they grow, which is less than a student might have room to grow in the 10th percentile. But is it worth looking more deeply into how that actually works?
We can definitely show that. And I would say it's not, since we are comparing students to a cohort of students that are similar to them, there's not a limit on how much room there is to grow. We're essentially ranking a student on how much they grew compared to their similar cohort. So you can, even if you're at the very top of the scale and we're comparing you to other students who scored at the very top of the scale, you could do better or worse than that
So
peer
you still
group.
have 0 to 100 within that.
Exactly, within that cohort of students, yeah.
I'd like to be able to explain that better. Maybe I could meet with you, because
Yeah.
I get that question a lot.
Actually, Board Member Board Member Cone. You had a question.
I'm not sure if this question is going to be answerable. Where you have districts that are typically very high performing but have experienced elevated rates of opting out, could that lead to a district not appearing on the accredited with distinction list? And I know that's hard to answer because that would require us to guess what the scores might have been for those kids who opted out.
So we've done studies across the state to see, if we look at the state level, how low could participation go before we're not, confident in what we're reporting. And we're far above that at the state. But it is very, as you allude to, very different at the school and district level. And there's a difference between random opt-out or a selective opt-out, right? If certain groups of students are choosing to opt out, how big that population is. So it is different based on the district itself and that district makeup. But we can definitely, we've looked into that data actually at the district and school level as well, so we can present that or share that data to show you how different districts are faring with that. But it is different across the state.
Yeah, I might discuss it with you further maybe at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Ask your question.
Is this appropriate?
Yeah, I think it's appropriate. Board Member Rankin.
I'm looking at this accountability clock, and Aguilar reorganized 6 on the eighth year. I just.
Where are they?
Where are they? And I haven't heard of them. Is it a small district? I'm sorry?
Yeah.
I think that's for Ms. Pearson.
We had a hearing with them.
Last year.
Yes.
But why were they not brought back this year?
So, if you all remember, some of the districts you had come back in 1 year, and some of the districts you had to come
Oh,
back in 2 years.
it was based on what we said last
You all
year.
decided which ones, and so
Because it was not as
the 2 you
as
saw today.
critical.
Yep. So
Their
Aguilar was
situation
on the
was not
2
as
year.
critical.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they will be.
Yeah.
next
You had a
year.
few others that are on the 2 years. So if in the 2019 frameworks, if they don't earn improvement or performance, they'll be back.
But we
to
make
talk with you
those at
further.
the 5-year mark. We make those decisions at the 5 year.
When they came in for that initial hearing,
Yeah.
that's when you, in the written determination, you set that timeline for them to come back.
A note about this slide as well, it doesn't, so this is talking about the original cohort of districts that were on the clock in 2010. There are 2 districts who are on the clock this year who are not captured here because they were not on in 2010. And that's the Education Re-envision BOCES, they are year 3, and Deer Trail 26J, which is year 1 this year.
Thank you.
then we will be back in December next month to talk about school plan types after we finish the review of, or CE staffer finishes the review of school request reconsiders. The state board actually approves the school plan type, so it's a slightly different scenario than with the districts. So we'll be coming to you with that for a vote. And then after that, there's the possibility of district appeals, and then there will be further accountability clock hearings in the spring for districts and schools who hit that year 5 mark coming in this year.
And the ones that we asked to have come back in 2 years, if they're still on the clock.
So these in the fall, is that right? I'm sorry, will you say that again? I apologize.
Well, such as Aguilar.
They'll come back next fall. Yes, that's,
Right.
if we follow the pattern that we did this year, if that worked for you all, though. And if they are still priority improvement or turnaround, come back then.
That makes sense. Thank you. So the other piece, the other, never mind. So we did get a list of all the districts.
Yes, that was included in board materials.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we agreed that if we have any input for the commissioner regarding the SMART Act hearing and our strategic goals, that we will provide her with that soon, right? Because they're getting ready for that, even though it is next month, given the holidays, I would guess.
Sooner is better.
Just a detailed question. Will this be included in your, SMART Act, this accreditation report, or is the timing just slightly off?
We could, yeah, we don't usually include all that detail in the SMART Act report. You know, we can always include that as an appendices or something, but we tend to not get in those weeds with them.
And
We let
same-
you guys get in
yeah.
those weeds.
We love the weed patch.
I know.
and get it. And the same with the school performance frameworks, because we will have just done those.
Right.
Right?
You will, actually, I don't know if you will have approved those by then. I
Then
forget
you'll
when our
approve
hearing-
those on the 12th, right, is the board meeting, and then I think the 13th is JBC and the 17th is SMART Act.
Yeah.
I think those
So
are the
it'll
dates.
be tight, but, yeah.
Yeah, I know, because we were like, oh, we want to use updated 2018 data, but we'll have to just see where we're
Because
at.
we usually have to
And they-
submit, and in
yes,
fact, we
they
get in
wanted us-
trouble
yep.
each year, so that's is
Yeah,
a
we
good
had to-
reminder for me, thank
Yep.
you. So I
We have
don't,
it
try
on the
not to get in
calendar.
trouble this year. They like to have the materials like 2 weeks prior. So we're gonna have to
Yeah.
submit all of our materials before all
That's
of this
final,
data is
yep.
approved.
Yeah, we have that.
One of the things that I think you mentioned, or someone mentioned, is that to the extent we have districts that are on the clock, the folks who represent them in the legislature know that. Am I correct on that?
Jennifer Mello has been keeping districts, or keeping the legislators aware of, especially the hearings that happened today, and kind of those actions. In 2017, we met with all the representatives and legislators connected to any of those hearings ahead of time,
Okay.
so they knew the process. Now
Okay.
that there's so many new people that have just come in, we'll have to start bringing them up to speed on where any of their schools or districts are too.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Yes, she was very smart and thought of making sure that we did that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, item 13, which is future business, except I've got this all confused. Do you all have any input? I can tell you that in December, we plan to have a very abbreviated meeting, which you actually don't have to attend in person. It will be abridged, and it won't start until 10 o'clock, because I believe that's the day that PEBC has their superintendent forum, to which we're all invited, I believe. And it ends about 9 or 9:15, which is why we've changed it to 10 o'clock. This will be a short meeting. We will only be voting on the
School plan
accreditation, the
types.
school plan types.
Oh, that's what I meant, school plan. Sorry.
So then in January, we'll have a real meeting. We'll have 4 more notices of rulemaking, 3 rulemaking hearing, legislative update, possibly another research request from the Colorado Department of Human Services. Joyce's request to look at the uniform open enrollment form, which is a great idea. And Board Member Durham's request to have the State Land Board give us a brief presentation, and I have asked him to contact that individual to let us know which of our 2 days he is available so that we get that properly on the agenda. And are there any other items, colleagues? Thank you for all your super hard work. Go, quick. Yep.
Well, I wonder if it would be okay for Ms. Tollison to fill us in or catch us up or remind us about the current status of our quasi-judicial when it comes to these
Oh, good
2
idea.
accountability hearings. We're not done, so I just
Good idea. Thank you.
Curious.
Great question, Board Member Goff and members of the board. Until you've issued your final decision,
use your
and we've got a closed record, remember, our live hearing is ended, our live hearing is ended. And our record is closed, so just hold folks off and say, we're gonna issue our final decision. I don't know if we've got a firm date yet for you all to get together, hopefully within the next 14 days or so, so you don't have to put people off too long. Please direct them to leave you alone and tell them the lawyer said so. That
Ooh, I
doesn't
like
ever
that
work.
one.
but-
Yeah.
Can we use that for everybody or just? No.
We will send out to you as quickly as we can organize our calendars, the date that we'll have.
Right, but I
the
think that might be
hearing. I just-
dependent on our legal counsel as to
It is.
how long it's gonna, how long do you think you want or need
We,
to do a draft of these orders?
we will move as fast as it takes. I don't think it's in
That's not
anybody's best
specific.
interest to drag this out. Originally, we had talked about next Tuesday, which if you all said, that's what we want to do, we'd figure out a way to make it happen, though I would encourage you all to consider letting us beg off till the middle of the week right after Thanksgiving, so that, somewhere in there, that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but if that starts to become a problem for you all, we will just make it happen, whatever it's gonna take.
2 weeks, less than 2 weeks.
Well, do you have feedback, guys, where there are certain days that are, I have a couple days that won't work for me. Tuesday, or Wednesday, Thursday of that week won't work for me. So if we shoot for Tuesday, where'd my phone go?
So are,
Oh, right in front of me.
are
There
we
you go.
looking at it being a
A phone.
phone meeting or whatever seems to work?
Yeah, we can.
I think we're
we
talking
can
about
make whatever
phone meeting,
works
but
for you all.
sometimes even a phone meeting is,
I don't know whether this is a phone meeting.
sorry, what?
I don't know whether phone meeting is gonna,
Yeah,
you decide.
I agree.
We could offer both options, like the December meeting where if folks have to call in, they can, but we'll set it up as a full, setup so that board members can attend in person too.
So
We'll do
Monday
whatever
or
we can to
Tuesday
accommodate.
works for me on that week after Thanksgiving. Is there anyone for whom that does not work?
I have an appointment at 1 o'clock out in Lakewood on Monday the 19th, but other than that, that works.
Okay, maybe we should just send that in to Biz. I do agree that we ought to give you time.
We
Because you
absolutely
want
wanna
some
get it right.
time to reflect, to write it and then to reflect, and I'm in total agreement with that.
We're giving busy our schedules, is that what you said?
Our conflicts, well, is it okay if we do it that way? We say Monday or Tuesday of the week after Thanksgiving? What are your conflicts at that time? And I don't, between the 7th of,
So you're talking,
Steve will still
just
be
to
in
be
Arizona.
clear, because someone mentioned, I think was off here, the 26th and 27th, right?
yes.
He's coming back after Thanksgiving.
Okey doke.
Okay. Do you want any volunteers for working with it?
Oh, speaking of that, we need volunteers for the charter remand.
Just update you, I saw in my email that Joe just did a draft order, which I think looks fine, and has sent it to Busy. So it may be that, because today's was a pretty narrow sort of discussion, so it's around if somebody wants to take a look and see if you can sign off on it today.
Don't we have to have two?
You know, is that what it says in your procedures? Because there's not otherwise any specific requirement, frankly. I mean, I know that we've done that as a matter of practice.
I think it's up to you.
Let's stick to our procedures, guys, please. I realize it's a straight shot, but I kinda don't wanna get into arguing with somebody sometime about whether we do or we don't.
Yep, that's right.
So do I have two volunteers?
And this is 2 volunteers to work on the charter remand.
Remand. Have one volunteer, going,
And Deb.
okay. Thank you.
And then I think there was a question if we wanted 2 board members to work with Julie and staff on the orders to make sure, was that right? That was one of your suggestions.
I flipped out on that one.
Yeah, which is
Okay.
fine. I mean, I just didn't want,
I think that is so, to
Weedy.
me, that is so, weedy and so important that I wouldn't wanna say that I represent everybody in this. I mean, I think we came to a lot of concurrence. Nevertheless, I really think, and it's so important that we should all be, deeply involved in it. And we are also going to, each of us are gonna have to defend it once we no longer have that quasi judicial, protection is the wrong word.
sometimes it's the right word.
Well, it feels like the right one right now, but I mean thereafter, I think we need to all, be completely engaged in that one. So I didn't share it with you, Commissioner, but I did share that with our AG, our AG. I'm gonna start calling you AG.
Sounds good.
Board member Phil.
Just had a couple of questions. Okay, A, how quickly does Busy meet our Monday, Tuesday schedules for that last week of November?
I'll probably send an email out
Yesterday.
tomorrow,
So
so,
sometime this evening.
or
Tomorrow, she said.
tomorrow,
Tomorrow.
if you, yeah. So-
And then my second question was, with respect to what we're crafting for those 2 accountability cases, it's so important and we've never done it before, so I'm wondering, for those of us who process a little bit better when we're talking things out, is there any chance to kind of reconvene to something like an executive session midway or at first draft, or are we gonna get the final draft and then very quickly thereafter cast a vote? Just so I know the,
I understand. Suggestion from Commissioner and from AG.
I think, ideally, the draft should capture what it is you all wanna accomplish, but it may be constrained by some particular, and the big one's gonna be the constitutional local control provision and some of those things we're gonna have to write with an eye towards. So when you get that draft, it may very well be that people have questions about why it was done the way it was done, which makes executive session helpful. Of course, that's very difficult to do unless you just have them be separate telephone calls, I guess. You have an executive session, it ends and everybody calls in, because I assume when we do telephonic meetings, I don't know how you facilitate public listening.
Since we'll be here, I don't think I would give out the call-in number.
Okay, gotcha.
Because the public could attend in
And they just
person.
hear it?
Yep,
And, okay.
yeah.
may I interject a thought? Similar to the procedures that we do when we have a legislative, a vote whether on how to weigh in on legislative matters, those who wish to attend and are able to can, and those who cannot can call in. Would that kind of a format work?
I think it would work. I mean, it would work for me. I would defer to everyone else, but.
My worry is just that the very first time we lay eyes on it, there's gonna be some digestion and discussion, and then.
And I'd like to get it to you all in advance enough that you didn't feel like I just sat down in the chair, had to read it and vote on it. I totally understand.
Well, there's a little challenge with that, because unless you have it done by Wednesday of next week, because Thursday's Thanksgiving. I really don't wanna suggest to you that you've gotta be delivering that on Thursday or Friday, and then there's the following Monday.
If
So,
you all meet on I know you're all looking at calendars, but if you eyed more towards Tuesday rather than Monday, it might give us a chance to
Okay.
at least have it to you sort of a day ahead without it being over the holiday.
Yeah, I'd like to protect your time and your staff's time.
That's-
Actually, our staff's time.
You know, I'd like to make a recommendation that if all of us think right now and until that time about things we really would like to see in there, so that when we get it, we'll be able to agree, but also make sure those details of things we have talked about, we've included, or at least brought up among us for discussion.
But we've done that. But I thought that was the point of today.
Yeah, that was what
Because
we did.
Yeah,
That was
I-
they're gonna walk out of here today with that as their
So,
bulk of
except
their
what we forgot.
big body. of
Exactly.
info.
What did you forget?
Well,
I forgot what I forgot.
but we'll know when we see what she
Yeah.
has out there, and it's better if we, in our mind, reiterate it ourselves, I believe.
Yeah, and if time allows, and I hope it will, that when we send it to you, maybe I'll have just a little cover memo explaining if there's anything in there that I think is just obvious fodder for questions, I'll try to
Yeah,
explain
that'd be
why
good.
the
That'd
draft
be
is
good.
structured the way it is.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So we don't wanna leave.
I second.
Nobody
You don't
wants
wanna
to.
leave?
I don't either, Jane, I'm staying with you.
All right, bring in the wine. I found my husband, so that's a good thing.
Is that, he's the honk on the horn?
No,
What you
he's
want?
here. No, I'm gonna ignore that.
Okay.
Oh, didn't I just officially, oh, she's wants a hammer.
Thank you.
Hit it harder.